What survival myth is complete baloney and could get you killed? If you ever fall off a ship or ferry at sea and are lucky enough to be spotted, don't try to swim your way to safety. The more you swim, the less your chances of survival. Just try to keep afloat and conserve energy and body heat, while the rescue teams do what they're supposed to do. Unless you're in hypothermic waters, the best bet is always to just stay afloat without trying to swim somewhere else. This information about falling overboard, hypothermia and conditions, survival at sea, etc. is based on my own experience of 12 years sailing on a merchant ship. Okay, this isn't the most exotic and interesting of these, but if you're walking alone at night, putting a key between each finger with the thought of punching someone and impaling them on 3 keys is useless. You're much more likely to hurt the webbing on your fingers since the grip you have on each key will be very weak. Instead, put a single key between your thumb and forefinger, parallel to your thumb, and make a fist. This still isn't a great defense, but it's an improvement over simply a fist. Also, don't try to kick a man in the crotch unless you have an amazing shot, in which case you're probably better off running away. If you miss or don't kick hard enough, both of which are more likely in the case that you're panicking, you're just going to cause mild discomfort and make them more angry. There was a girl I knew in college who got attacked. She took the whole handful of keys with the keys coming out the bottom of her fist and just went to town on the guy's face. It worked and the guy was arrested because the facial injuries made him pretty easy to recognize. Probably not the best tactic, but hard object plus adrenaline got the job done. Poison ivy isn't just washed off with water and soap, it almost leaves a sap-like residue on your skin. Wash the area and wipe off the residue, never reusing the same part of the cloth. Imagine wiping grease off your skin, it's much the same. You can avoid some nasty rashes and immune responses if you do it correctly. It can make a huge difference outdoors. The YouTube videos on how to unarm an attacker from close range. You will die before you can yell yee-haw. If you haven't trained extensively in real self-defense, you should never try to fight an armed opponent. Just give them what they want or run. These videos usually have the person letting the moves be put on them very easily. In reality, a lot of these moves need to be executed at extremely fast speed with practiced precision. Otherwise, you'll just end up in a wrestling match against someone with a knife, which usually doesn't end well. Yeah, I think the more training and experience one gets in this sort of thing, the more one just accepts how screwed you probably are if you get attacked. Muggers generally wait for a decent-looking target in an advantageous situation so that they know that the odds are with them. The narrator has tried a few different martial arts classes, and all they've really done is reinforce how absolutely screwed I am if someone jumps me in an alleyway. When you're lost or stranded, the first mistake is to look for food and water before having a shelter up to keep yourself dry and warm. When I say shelter first, that includes having a fire too. When you're wet and exposed to the elements, your core body temperature can drop and you can get hypothermia if it gets too cold, and you'll burn more calories than necessary. A big reason for building a shelter too is to also keep yourself off the ground, because the ground is an infinite heat sink, which means you lose your body heat way faster than you'd think, and you'll be exposed to the cold and elements. And yes, it is good to be near a water source, but remember that it's always colder around rivers, streams, lakes, and oceans. Make sure you're able to easily gather shelter and fire material within the area, plus finding a prime location to set up shelter.
If you ever find yourself in snake country, make as much noise as possible. Most people want to avoid snakes, so they stay quiet, but they're more scared of you than you are of them. Talk loudly, stomp, but obviously keep an eye and ear out for any fellas who don't want you to be there. Except for the death adder, which will just lie there and ignore 19 people stepping over them, and then bite the 20th one who had the bad luck to step on it. My source? I'm Australian, we know these things. Wear a seatbelt. There's myths about it being bad if you go into a lake or there's a fire, but first, that's an incredibly tiny proportion of car crashes, and then if you're in that situation, you're far more likely to be knocked out and die of inaction if you're not wearing your seatbelt. I know that this is a mundane tip, but you're far more likely to be in a life-threatening car crash than be stabbed or be falling in an elevator. Wear your seatbelt. If you have to forage for food, avoid mushrooms entirely. The odds are so slim that you'll find an edible kind that you're much better off looking for things like nuts, seeds, and berries. They also hold negligible amounts of calories, so even if you are knowledgeable about fungi, it still doesn't seem worth it. Guess the only scenario where you might go for it is if you have knowledge on edible mushrooms and stumble upon a grove full of them.
Too many times I've seen the advice that if you input your PIN backwards in an ATM, it'll withdraw money, but that it'll also be stuck and the police will be notified in the event of a robbery. That's completely false, and you could get killed or seriously hurt if you play dumb like you don't know your PIN. This is an anecdote, but I know a guy who was held up at an ATM. The robber made the mistake of holding him up before he entered his PIN. He was a quick thinker and just kept entering the wrong PIN on purpose and acted more and more frustrated that it wasn't working. After the third try or whatever that cancelled the transaction, he could hear the guy run off behind him. Now, me? My life isn't worth $400. I would have just let the guy have the money. Never go to a second location with anyone robbing you though. If they're bothering with that, the plan is most likely for you to be dead afterwards. Gradually loosening an applied tourniquet over time is a thing I still see in first aid training videos for some reason. Just don't do that, guys. Once the tourniquet is on, remember what time it was applied and mark the person if you can, and leave the rest to doctors in a stable environment. Loosening a tourniquet may result in blood loss returning, which requires retightening it. Tightening and loosening repeatedly may cause, on top of additional blood loss, blood to pool up inside the limb, which can cause even more damage. If done right, a tourniquet should hurt like a motherfricker, and you're going to want to loosen it, but in the words of Egon Spengler, it would be bad. Rescue breaths are wildly overrated in most TV and movies. You'll see someone in cardiac arrest, and the rescuer will stop giving compressions and focus on breathing into a person's mouth, and blammo! Awake, alert, alive. Nope, don't do that. Your body does store a fairly decent amount of oxygen in its blood at all times. If someone in front of you ODs and their mouth is covered with saliva or vomit, or they collapse in front of you of a suspected cardiac arrest, your plan of action should be twofold. 1. Are they breathing, and do they have a pulse? This is easy to mess up, especially in a moment of panic. My rule as an EMS provider is that if you don't feel it in 10 seconds, it's not there. So start compressions. If they're not in cardiac arrest, they'll let you know, and the law covers you under Good Samaritan clauses in most cases. And second, if you're the only person attending this body, don't stop and give rescue breaths if help is on the way and will be there soon. It takes about 4 to 7 decent compressions to get blood recirculating in the body after stopping to give mouth to mouth. That's a lot of blood, carrying a lot of vital oxygen reserves that aren't making it to the brain. Obviously, if you're a long way out from help and feel safe to do so, give rescue breaths, but it should never be priority number 1. By the way, if you hear ribs crack, make a face or vomit noises if you have to, tell the person their bones are frickin' grossing you out, but don't stop those compressions. Because what are compressions? That's right, they're number frickin' 1. If you get stabbed by anything, don't pull it out since it could be the thing preventing you from bleeding out. Instead, immobilize it and go to the hospital where they can stop the bleeding when they remove it. You don't need to wait 24 hours to report a missing person. If you think someone is missing, report it as such. The faster a missing person report is filed, the greater the chance the person will be found, especially if it's a child. Missing children are at a high risk during the first 24 hours, especially if abducted. People think that herbivorous animals are friendly and peaceful, so you're safe being around them and their presence will show you where food is. Seriously, everything from cows to deer can and will kill you if you make it angry. It's usually a good idea if you're in the wilds not to get near any large wild animals, but herbivores can often be even more aggressive than the predators. If a predator attacks you, you only have a fairly good chance of scaring it off, especially if it's smaller than you, because it's likely only looking for food. If a herbivore attacks you, you're screwed because it genuinely wants you to die. That's a pretty good way of putting it. If it's a predatory animal, then it's probably capable of finding something smaller and easier to eat if you put up anything resembling a spirited fight or chase. If a cow or bull is trying to run you down, then it's a frickin' vendetta and it will follow you all the way home if it can. People say follow flying birds to find water. Those birds could simply be flying to spend a night somewhere or mate, so we can't rely on them. Fish are the ones you should follow to find water. Don't eat snow to stay hydrated if you're in a winter survival situation. Losing the heat to snow while eating it is more dangerous than dehydration. Heat it up or let it melt in a container first to lose less heat. It won't kill you, but don't pee on a jellyfish sting. It will actually release more of that toxin.
You can pee directly on the jellyfish to show dominance.
That's for stinging my wife. Contrary to what Fallout New Vegas would have one believe, you can hydrate from soda. If that's all you have, drink it. sticking your finger up a dog's butt. I've read this a few times, it's not a good idea. The best way to deal with a dog attack is to try to move away slowly, sideways with your arms at your sides so that you're not threatening. Don't look at the eyes and don't smile because both of those are seen as a challenge. Don't run away because the dog will instinctively chase you. Get high up if you can because dogs don't climb very well. And if crap really hits the fans, do the opposite of looking unthreatening. Stand tall with your arms in the air and growl or roar. If there's something nearby, throw it at the dog to make it think twice. Wrap clothing around your arm to hand to the dog should it go in for a bite. You're pretty much guaranteed to be bit, so make it in a place that's less important and less likely to bleed out. Don't lose your footing or fall on the ground. If that happens, you're toast. Don't pull away from the dog if it's already bitten you because this will cause more damage. Once the dog has bitten you, it probably won't let go. Aim to kill or maim the dog. Fingers in the eyes are good. Jumping on the dog with all your body weight is even better. If you break their ribs, they'll probably give up. Staying away from aggressive dogs, all told, is your best bet. If you like Am I the Jerk, you're probably going to love Am I the Genius. Check it out, linked below. Also, go to amithejerk.com/submit if you would like to submit your own stories.
Cotton wicks moisture.
Cotton is probably the worst material to wear in an outdoor survival situation because it holds moisture and in doing so, loses its ability to keep you warm. Punching a shark in the nose. As a diver, there was a joke that we're supposed to use our dive knives for shark attacks. We'd cut our dive buddy and swim away, hoping the shark would get them first. One myth I've heard was that moss only grows on the north side of trees. This is, of course, false. A lot of Southeast Asians believe that going from heat to aircon, jumping in a swimming pool on a hot day, or even going near a fan could kill you. So many deaths happen every year because people are afraid of being shocked to death from going to hot to cold too quickly. You shouldn't just drink alcohol to stay warm. You sweat, your blood rushes to your skin, and you'll freeze and die that bit quicker. That you can eat what animals eat. That's not true. Animals have different digestion systems that aren't the same as humans. Sucking a snake bite. That will often make it worse. What you want to do is stop the venom from traveling from the side of the bite onto the lymphatic system and then into the bloodstream. Do not suck, cut, wash, or otherwise investigate the wound. Don't try to catch or kill the snake. Identifying the kind of snake is not worth the risk of a second bite and the delay in getting to your other priorities. Priority 1 should be to get away from the snake. Priority 2, get help, like getting someone nearby to call an ambulance or worst case scenario, call yourself. Sorry, that was a joke. And priority 3, stay still. Moving your muscles is what helps pump the fluid through your lymphatic system to the lymph nodes where it can enter the bloodstream the quickest. Ideally, keep the bite below your heart, but immobilization is the most important thing. And priority 4, if there's someone else with you, get them to apply a pressure dressing to tightly compress the whole limb. This can greatly slow the flow of lymph and buy you hours. Removing a bullet is more dangerous than leaving it in. Trying to remove it can tear vital organs, it can be pushed in even deeper, or removing it can cause the person to bleed out. The closest I can think of is bracing yourself if you're about to be in an accident. Try to go limp. You're more likely to walk away with minor injuries if you go limp. That's how drunk drivers survive crashes. One I know of is the myth that you can drink water from a cactus. It's mostly false. You can only drink from a small minority of cacti without having certain health consequences that I'm aware of. Oh, I've got a couple. Basic wilderness survival is required to be taught where I live. First, don't drink your pee if you're thirsty. It's high in salt and will make you more dehydrated, just like ocean water. Eating snow where you're thirsty is also bad. It lowers your core temperature and you can become hypothermic. Don't play dead with all bears. It depends on the bear. Some will definitely mess your crap up if you play dead. If it's a grizzly, stand your ground and back up slowly, and if it becomes irritated, get into the fetal position and cover your neck and play dead. If it's a black bear, throw rocks and sticks at it and make a lot of noise. From my experience, black bears are skittish and run away. If it's a polar bear, back away slowly to safety, and if it attacks, pray they kill you fast enough. Defend yourself by any means necessary. Remember to always carry bear spray or a gun if you're in bear country. Don't stand underneath doorways in case of earthquakes. Doors and door frames are just not made the same anymore, so you're more likely to sustain serious injuries if you do. You're better off staying hidden underneath a desk or table. I know it's not what they intended, but this comment makes it seem like we're actively hiding from the earthquake like a game of hide and seek, which is an image so bizarre that it makes me kinda giggle. Apparently, some people think the best way to survive a wolf attack is to bend down and show the wolf you're submissive towards him and pose no threat. If you do that, you're dead. The wolf will 100% kill you. Your best way is to walk away without turning your back on them, maintaining eye contact the whole way. If you look away or turn your back, the wolf's killer instinct will kick in and it will kill you. Don't make a lot of noise and aggressive movements towards the wolf the same way you'd do to a black bear, because most likely it'll be seen as a challenge, not a threat. Trying to outrun a tornado is about the worst possible thing you can do in a tornado situation. Take shelter. Get underground, go into an interior room, lay in a ditch while covering your head if you have to. Tornadoes are basically like 3-year-olds throwing temper tantrums, except instead of toys, it's cars, buses, and trains they're throwing around. But also toys too, which they can throw hard enough to literally pass through your body. A vehicle of any kind is about the last thing you want to be in when a tornado comes through. And sure enough, I've got people telling me that, "Nuh-uh, you can totally outrun a tornado because storm chasers do it all the time, and tornadoes only move like 30 miles per hour. Which is objectively false, but their top speed is more like 70 miles per hour. But don't listen to a random idiot like me on the internet. The CDC says, if you're in a car, do not try to outrun a tornado, but instead find the nearest sturdy building. And the NOAA has this to say: vehicles are extremely risky in a tornado. There is no safe option when caught in a tornado in a car, just slightly less dangerous ones. If the tornado is visible far away and traffic is light, you might be able to drive out of its path by moving at right angles to the tornado. Seek shelter in a sturdy building or drive underground if possible. I hope that discerning listeners will work out that what they're advising here is not to try to outrun the tornado, but that you don't need to get out of your vehicle if you're very far away. And finally, the National Weather Service says, being in a vehicle during a tornado isn't safe. The best course of action is to drive to the closest shelter, and if you're unable to make it to a safe shelter, either get down in your car and cover your head, or abandon your car and seek shelter in a low-lying area such as a ditch or ravine. So in short, never try to outrun a tornado, and anyone who ever tells you otherwise is objectively wrong and spreading dangerous misinformation. End of rant. One thing you see a lot in older movies and even today is to conserve your water if you're in a desert or if you lack water. Never do that. If all you do is drink enough to stop being thirsty, the water won't reach necessary organs and parts of your body. Over time, you'll be underhydrated and can suffer the effects of dehydration without ever feeling thirsty. The best usage of your water is to drink at set intervals, even if you're not thirsty. Also, don't drink large amounts all at once because your body won't be used to it, and more of it is going to be wasted via urination than if you space out reasonably sized swigs throughout the day. In the same vein, if you're ever hiking, working, or going to be outside in hot and dry climates, leave the shorts and tank top at home, and instead go for thin and loose-fitting long-sleeve shirts and pants. The big threat to your health is the sun. Avoid direct sun exposure wherever possible. Sunblock is solid enough for shorter trips, but you're going to be sweating off even the best stuff, so be sure to constantly reapply when directed, or if your skin gets too wet. Loose-fitted clothing also helps slow down how fast your sweat will evaporate into the air. Normally, you want to have sweat evaporate as that's how your body will lose the excess heat, as the sweat will draw away heat from your body and cool you down when the wind hits you. But in this scenario, you're losing sweat too fast for your body to transfer much, if any, heat, as the sun is hot enough to evaporate your sweat as soon as you start sweating. Limiting your evaporation also stops you from wasting a ton of water via constantly sweating, which is one of the biggest factors of the water loss you should avoid. I watch a lot of fight videos in all the popular places of the internet like Reddit street fights, and one of two things pretty much always happens when someone gets knocked out. Either their friends come and try to pick them up, shake them and slap them on the face to regain consciousness, or they're left there on their back while people film and laugh and say, "Ho-ho, you got knocked the frick out." These are both bad things to do because that person has just suffered possible serious trauma to the head, especially if they smacked it on the pavement when they came down. So shaking them awake isn't a great thing to do. It might seem like leaving them be to recover on their own is a better idea, but it's not always because they run the risk of choking on their tongue. The best thing to do is to put them in the recovery position, which will make sure they don't have problems breathing until they regain their bearings, and if they don't after a while, it's a safe way for them to be until medical help comes. You cannot drive big boulders, and the pioneers have in fact not been riding those babies for miles. If you try jumping in a malfunctioning falling elevator at the very second it smashes into the ground, you'll still die. Don't put severed body parts in ice, it'll practically give the dead tissue frostbite, thus making it near impossible to reattach. That the first thing you should do when ending up in a survival situation is to look for food or water. On average, you can survive 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water. Instead, you first need to pay attention to your attitude. Panicking and using a negative mindset will get you killed. Being positive and celebrating your survival will help you make it out alive. A shelter to keep you warm helps as well. Most of the crap that Bear Grylls does. I think that Bear gets a bad rep, actually. In survival, you have to decide which is likely to kill you first and deal with that first. Often the first and hardest decision you have to make is the decision to stay put or self-rescue. Bear always chooses to self-rescue, which may not always be the best choice, but that's what the show is. For staying put, Les Stroud is your man. Curing an eye infection with your urine is dangerous. Let me repeat that. Do not under any circumstances put urine in your eyes. Head to the doctor. Even waiting it out is better. What red flags in interviews have made you decline a job offer? I was once asked during a job interview about my tolerance to verbal attacks. When the person noticed that I was a bit taken aback by the question, he quickly followed up and said to keep in mind he was talking about verbal attacks and not physical ones. I immediately realized that this would not be a job for me, and I excused myself from further consideration for the position.
What kind of job was it? And did the interviewer mean verbal attacks from customers or coworkers or, worse yet, the boss?
I can see how that could be a red flag for some positions, but if you're applying for telesales or jobs where you're likely to have to deal with angry customers, being able to handle verbal attacks is vital.
Interviewer has visible anger issues with other staff. I encountered this at the beginning of my career. They didn't hire me, which was good.
I've legit watched a manager unleash on his coworkers not knowing that I could see him because I was early in my interview. Coincidentally, I took the job just because I knew it would be short-term and my friend worked there. Didn't even get to the interview. Got a call to set up an interview. I say, okay, I can do Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. He says, I need you to come in today. Okay, I need a job, so I say I can try. Where do I need to go? He was an hour away by car. I said I couldn't, and he got all huffy. Like, dude, if you're this crappy when I don't work for you, I don't even want to know how you treat employees. If they need you to interview them right now, then they need you to start working for them right now.
Absolutely do not accept their job offer unless you're absolutely desperate yourself.
Exactly. I looked it up on Glassdoor and it was very grim. My fiancé had a guy that called for a same-day interview and he was verbally attacking my fiancé for not being able to come in because our county was under a travel ban because it was a fricking blizzard outside. He passed on that job, obviously. I had a job offer me unpaid bonus hours as a form of community service.
Reminded me of seeing a job posting that said with the position you'd enjoy the variety of working various shifts, holidays, and weekends as needed. Yes, because that's something anyone would enjoy.
Was invited to interview for a remote position, but did some research and found out they made employees install software that took a photo of their face every 9 minutes to ensure they weren't goofing off. Can you imagine? I don't want my employer to have a huge collection of the awkward facial expressions I make. Declined interview. Take 1,000 photos of your face staring at the monitor, install a virtual webcam software, and run those photos in an endless loop. You are now invisible.
Make sure you wear the same color shirt to work each day.
Over the various bad workplace compilations like this that I've done, one thing has become very clear. There are a great many companies out there that would identify the social conditions of George Orwell's 1984 as a goal to aspire to rather than a social warning.
It's a red flag for me if they stumble over what the exact job description is.
Or if they say, we'll work that out later.
Or if they say, duties as assigned.
I've seen this looking for jobs as a software engineer. For us anyway, this isn't a red flag because it's impossible to determine all the duties required when the product itself is ever evolving. For example, I was asked to set up a few build machines because I took good notes when I onboarded, although that was never in the job description. We were a small company, so it made sense to have few engineers handle things such as this, rather than hire another employee to handle all of it. Oh, and they say, you decide how much you make.
I agree, meaning that if you take that job, it'll be brutal work to go over minimum wage. When you walk through the site and you don't see a single person smiling, I don't mean those fake customer service smiles either. If everyone there looks miserable, I'm out. Life is too short for that.
Even worse, when a couple of people are shaking their head no when you make eye contact with them. I had one person do that to me when I was being interviewed for a personal assistant job. He kept looking at me, then I noticed the subtle head shakes. He was leaving. I would have been taking over his position. The woman did seem a tad nightmarish. I declined when the guy left. Glad he gave me warning.
Oh, I totally agree, but I also want to tell you how it is at my workplace. Most of the time while working, we're having an absolute blast and joking around all the time. But if our boss walks past us with a stranger, we all close our mouths and continue working, but very focused on our work, so we don't make the impression that our whole workshop is filled with a bunch of absolute goofballs. In a lot of industries, we work really long hours sometimes, so we're really looking for someone who's willing to put in the hours and is interested in making a bigger impact. Is code for, we're looking for someone to sacrifice their weekends on the altar of our arbitrary goals and expectations because we can't be bothered to pay a second person for the role. It's the old, we work hard and play hard deal. That just means everyone works long hours and then goes out to happy hour once a week. Happy hour slowly becomes something that kind of feels like more work and something that you're obligated to go to. Or becomes one donut on Friday, and only one donut. We had the mythical company fishing trip that was promised for the end of every season. I finally shut that crap down forever one hot day when the boss asked, "Where would you like to go on the company fishing trip?" This year, I said, I would actually like to go fishing, and it was never mentioned again. I used to be in commercial fishing, and one of my first skippers gave me this advice. When you're checking out a potential boat to take position on, make sure to look at the engine room first. If it's neat, clean, and orderly, then that's a solid vessel to be working on. If it's filthy, cluttered, and in disarray, then get off the boat and don't take the job. Oh, please expand. I'm interested to know the reasoning behind this. The type of captain that allows the most important part of his vessel to be a huge mess all the time is also the type to cut corners and operate in a generally unsafe manner while out at sea. I'm sure there's plenty of exceptions to this, but when my life is in their hands for months at a time, I want to know darn well that they can take condition of their vessel seriously. Arr. Additionally, a well-kept boat is a sign of a good crew. Pay on a fishing boat is dependent upon the value of the catch. You'll earn more on a good crew.
Most of my work has been lineman work for cable or telephone providers and driving trucks, and if they start asking about prior workers' comp claims, then I'm out. I've had owners ask me if I got hurt, would I allow them to let them take care of it and keep the government out of it? Yeah, no way.
We're lax on safety and unwilling to improve, so we'd rather cover up problems than prevent them. Your health and well-being mean nothing to us.
Anyone using the phrase work hard and play hard during the interview? I once asked, what exactly do you mean by play hard, with air quotes around play hard? The interviewer was befuddled and then said something like, we get donuts and bagels once per quarter. Man, talk about living on the fricking edge.
We don't offer benefits, job security, or dignity. However, we do have a foosball table and a coffee machine in the break room.
Yep, if you want your work to have a great atmosphere, treat your employees well. Don't just have some weird forced socialization once a year where you're jammed into the break room with the one employee that can only talk about photos of their cat. Right after college, I got an interview to be a store manager for an Abercrombie & Fitch clothing store. Before the interview, I was told to dress in my own personal style, but that in clothes would be preferred. I was given a list of what that meant. At the interview, I was asked to make fun of or be judgmental of people walking around us, what they were wearing, their style, hairstyles, designs, or shirts, etc. For example, when a lady walked past us wearing jeans and red Mickey Mouse sweatshirt, the lady interviewing me scoffed and said, "Can you believe her wearing that out in public? I mean, what is she, like 12? I shrugged and said, what does it matter if that's her style? I didn't get the job. I realized she was trying to see if I was a judgmental prick, and when I wasn't, she chose not to hire me. Later on, I found out this was standard practice for Abercrombie.
You should have just gone way too far immediately. Looks like her gunt is sticking out.
They look like they murdered a homeless person to get that outfit.
Just make a real frickin' meal out of it, you know?
Or take the opportunity to roast the interviewer.
Like, what is that top you're wearing? What are you trying to do? Signal the aliens from the cosmos with all those sequins? Also, I would prefer not to work weekends. When can I start?
I used to work at their headquarters and my job was basically to fold clothes, apply tags, and sort them. Their CEO at the time, I think his name is Michael Jeffries or something, Anyway, he's a crazy substance head in his 50s, and he used to walk by every now and again and give people fist bumps and referred to us as dude and bro. We were all either young 20s or teenagers. He also had calf implants and wore mandals around everywhere. Seeing your anecdote about that company doesn't surprise me at all, being that their CEO was trying to live his teen years while running the company. Last year, I declined an offer to work at a company with a couple of friends for 2 reasons. 1. As part of the interview process, I had to complete an assignment, and I hated the assignment. 2. I got a vibe from my friends that they weren't super happy at the company. Since turning down the offer, both of the friends have complained to me about their boss, and one of them told me that their unlimited paid time off policy basically doesn't mean anything because they don't get to take much time off. Absolutely. In my company, paid time off is called earned time, because you earn it through working. The expectation is that you can use up that time whenever you want, and if your manager doesn't like it, they'd better have a darn good reason to deny it. I've never heard of anyone getting denied. Much better than trying to guess exactly what the limit is to unlimited. People who visibly show that they haven't looked at your resume. I have no issues going in depth about my experience or things that may need clarification, but to blatantly not know anything about the person interviewing shows they don't even value their potential employees at a minimum. I've interviewed way too many people that didn't know what they had on their own resume. Well, that's different. Some people are chronic liars, but you can kind of tell once you sit down with them. When I was an OPS manager for a delivery company, I got a lot of those, and it's amazing how many people will lie for even a super basic job. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Asking for a fee before you can get started.
The extra E stands for expense.
Jobs pay you, pyramid schemes ask you to buy their crap up front and sell them. This happened to me. I made the right decision noping the frick out of there despite being desperate for a job at the time. Stress interview. I walked into one of these for a PhD interview. They deliberately were abrasive and unhelpful to the point of callousness, including tossing my entire proposal out of the window. After proposing a different approach, I then got criticized for not reading up on the proposal that they had given me in the same interview. Also, my lack of skills for such an approach, again given to me in the gosh darn interview. I was happy to change approach, but I can't generate years worth of experience with a click of my fingers. They ended up offering me a position, but without funding. Then I asked them if they had any ideas on where to apply for funding for this niche area. No response, I just ignored them after that. If anyone tries that on me in another job, I'm walking straight out the door. Life is too short for such nonsense. If they ask if you're on medications, and if so, what medications and why?
That's definitely illegal where I live.
Same, so I would legit throw that interview on purpose and waste their time for being such complete crapbags. I explained that I was in school and outlined my availability. He asked if I was fine skipping all of my classes on Thursdays because that's when they need me.
No? Will you pay me for the credit hours I'm missing? No? Then no.
That's a bold request for what I assume wasn't even a well-paying job, given that it was probably part-time while someone was in school. The mixture of employees. If there are lots of new employees, and if they have hiring ads, run. They likely rip through employees. Also, beware the places that have a lot of people who have been there forever and no one who has been working there for an intermediate amount of time. In my experience, it turned out that this place had a lot of old-timers and new hires, because the new people would be excluded and chewed up. My current company has this problem, and us new hires have started having our own meetings while the old crew is in their endless 9 AM meeting every day. Our meetings go something like, has anyone ever actually seen the exemption list that Todd's going on about, or do we think it only exists in his head? Alright, battle plan for this week is to trick him into confirming or denying as many clients as possible are or aren't on the list. Then the next week we type up the document, pass it around to everyone, and bring in donuts to distract them from asking questions about where we got this document from. I would watch this show. Years ago, I was about to be hired to work full-time in a car parts factory. I was at a second interview when the interviewer told me that upon being hired, I would need to see the doctor once every 3 months and sign a bunch of paperwork basically stating that if I got any respiratory or reproductive illness as a result of working around the fumes in that factory, that I understood and took full accountability for the consequences. I left and never went back. If I hear the culture is work hard, play hard, I'm out. That translates to, we beat you like a rented mule, and then throw a tragic Christmas party with a limited open bar. The interviewer was selling me on taking the job more than I was selling myself on getting the job. The interviewer gave me feedback on revising my resume, offered to advance me to the next interview round and coach me on how to handle the interview, etc. Never been offered that much support before or since. Really put me on guard and I turned down the job. About a year later, I ran into her while having lunch at a restaurant. I actually didn't recognize her at first because she had a big smile on her face, but was dead serious during my job interview. She admitted that company had been a stressful place to work. She now worked somewhere else and was much happier. I also backed out of a job opportunity because of similar reasons. I had a phone interview which seemed to go well. I was working full-time, so I had to schedule interviews and follow-ups around my current job. The people in the place that I interviewed wanted me to come in for a face-to-face, but I needed a couple of days to sort out my schedule at my current job. Over those next couple of days, they called me repeatedly, like 3 or 4 times a day, after I clearly told them that I would call them in a couple of days with some available times. That raised a lot of red flags, so I told them that I was no longer interested. I later found out the place was an absolute sweatshop and that the turnover there was terrible. Go figure. For me, it's the schedules. Someone offered me a job where I would often have to do 12-hour shifts and have meetings until 11 p.m. All of this for minimum wage. I'm 46, I can't do 12-hour shifts on my feet all day anymore. I'm 27 and due to a spinal injury, I'm lucky to be walking on my own again. I can't be on my feet for that length of time either, nor can I reliably lift 50 or more pounds or twist and bend over frequently. I'm fairly jacked due to a fixation on working out and sports conditioning before my injury, so when I explain that I can't do those things, I've gotten ridiculous and even nasty looks from interviewers, 2 of whom even called me out for just being lazy on the spot. I got up and walked out of both of those interviews immediately. If I was lazy, I wouldn't have this physique. And I'm already mortified by my own loss of mass due to being incapable of maintaining my workouts from 3 years ago. I don't need some middle manager thinking they know better than my freaking doctors do, and I certainly won't stand to be called lazy by someone who's never seen me work. They ask a lot of questions about something on your resume that isn't really relevant to the job you're applying for or of interest to you, and hint that they want you to do that as well. If it's something you don't mind or actually enjoy, that's fine, but be careful of getting locked into a role different from the one you interviewed for. Would you be willing to give up a few of your vacation days to help out some of your fellow co-workers finish their work? No. That's the first time I've seen this kind of proposal. Surely it can't be that common. Surely they can't ask you to give up time with your family. Oh wait, of course this must happen all the time now I think about it. We do more with less. Translated, we will overwork you and not pay you for it. Ah yes, the first job I landed out of college was in a newsroom where the motto was, us 4 and no more. As in, 1 sports reporter, 2 general assignment reporters, and 1 editor overseeing things. They refused to hire more people onto their staff even as the economy improved, and haven't given employees a raise since 2007. You also didn't have a set schedule, and would cover things anywhere between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m., oftentimes at a few hours' notice, so working another job to make ends meet was impossible. How that place is still functioning is beyond me, especially since you can literally work fast food and make more money these days. We're a human-sized company with a great startup spirit, which translates to unpaid extra hours and micromanagement. That's like the definition of sugarcoating a really crappy job and wearing many hats. Had an interview where the interviewer said, "So you probably made, what, like 40K last year?" I had made double that, and I knew that if I went with this company, I'd only make a little more than 40K. If he hadn't said that, I probably would have taken the job. One thing I experienced was as follows. The manager met me at my job and said I seemed like I would have a knack for the line of work he's in. I, being unhappy in my current job, perked up hoping this would be a good transition opportunity. First red flag, he didn't tell me to come by an office or job location for an interview, but to meet up for lunch. Again, being young and naive, I didn't see anything wrong with that. Fast forward to the lunch. I began to notice what was going on, but didn't want to be rude. Second red flag, the guy tried not to mention the company name. Toward the end of the interview, he asked me, "So, on a scale of 1 to 10, what's your interest level?" And I asked him the name of the company, and once he told me, I let him know that I was going to research the company to see if I wanted to continue with the process. Long story short, the company was Primerica, which in my opinion is the worst MLM scheme that I know of. If you do a little research, I'm sure you'll agree. My friend calls it a firing squad when you walk into an interview and you're seated in front of multiple people who just start shooting off questions at you. No conversation, no emotion, nothing to make you feel at ease. Strictly Q&A. After years at a company, I went on my first interview, very rusty. They wouldn't even ask me to expand on a few points. I was discouraged until I went on another one that was 1,000 times better. Just me and a few people sitting at a round table discussing my skills and such. I learned the former kind of interview is the one at a place where I don't want to work at. When the information the job interviewer gives you doesn't even match the job listing. When they make you sit at 2 different rooms for a good 30 minutes before it starts. Job hunting can be one of the most demoralizing processes to go through. When the HR interviewer has a huge fake smile, but while they lead me to the meeting room where the technical part will take place, I see a lot of burned out people with dead eyes and zombie-like faces. I study history and I work for a gardener to earn some money. Once I applied for a job in an archive, because the job would have a lot more to do with my major. The interview was terrible. They made me talk about gardening for nearly an hour. Interviews usually last 30 minutes where I live. I wanted to talk about my achievements in history because of the obvious connection to the archive, but all they wanted to know was how to trim trees and hedges. Also, they said that I'd have to be there at 8 a.m. to work and emphasized on how early that is and asked if I could handle that. When I said yes, they didn't believe me. I started gardening at 0750, so a lot of these weird questions. There's a big company in my province. Apparently they have pretty strict interviews, but in the end you have to meet the CEO, and you get to talk to him about whatever topic comes up. Friend of a friend talked about Clydesdales for 45 minutes. He got the job. I had an interviewer once that went ballistic on me when she found out I was engaged. She started off asking me where we were having the wedding and then went nuts, telling me that people have already gotten divorced over this position and I need to seriously consider it. I told her I'd already talked the position over with my fiancé and we were both prepared for it. She said I needed to talk it over again because there was no way we were ready. I noped the frick out of there after that. What the heck kind of position is this where the engagement status matters? What's the craziest thing that happened in a party during your high school and college years? I saw a 140-pound French-Canadian tear a sink out of a wall, run outside, and smash it to pieces against a tree. By the time we'd woken up the next morning, he'd already gone to Home Depot, brought a new sink, and installed it in the bathroom. French at night, Canadian by day. First they're sour, then they're sweet. One of my friends and I were at a house party. She drank 8 shots of tequila, one right after the other, and then proceeded to do the deed bareback up the butt on the front lawn while everyone watched. Not one of her finest moments. She's a Mormon now, apparently. We had a pet raccoon for 2 days, long party, who would hang out with us. We thought he was a nice furry guy, but then he betrayed us. We were pretty drunk, he left, came back with friends, looted our house. I don't want to be anti-raccoon, but it's hard for me to trust them now. If you read this, Fritz, reconsider. Come back and we'll start over. Sly Cooper strikes again. Hey, don't be raccoonist, dude. I got drunk off my butt and wandered off to McDonald's, which was like a mile off campus. I don't remember even leaving, but I got a call a week later from the McDonald's saying I didn't get the job because I didn't go to the interview. I guess in my drunken state I got there and realized I had no money, so I must have sat there and applied for a job. Didn't remember a thing. They called to ask if I wanted to reschedule, but my reaction was, "What the frick are you talking about?" So they kindly informed me that they didn't need my assistance. The dude must have thought I was an idiot. I should have explained that better. That's probably how most people start working at McDonald's. It's a contract bound in blood. Their own blood. Got busted by a police helicopter while drinking at the lake. Spotlighted us and yelled at us over a bullhorn to stay while 6 officers, complete with 2 K9 units, came down to where we were, gathered everybody up, walked us to where we parked our cars, searched us, cited one kid for having green herb, and then let us all go. It was pretty surreal. In conclusion, drank a couple of Keystones, got a 5-star wanted level. I forgot to include my favorite part of the story, so I'd rode to the party with 4 of my good friends. All of us were 17, except one dude who was 18, but being idiot teenagers, we all smoked cigarettes. They pretty much caught us by surprise with the spotlight. I mean, seriously, who the frick expects a police helicopter? So we didn't have time to ditch anything. There were about 20 of us altogether, so when we were all being escorted back to our cars in a big group, us 4 managed to pass our smokes off to the one guy old enough to have them. When the cops searched us, my friend ends up pulling 5 packs of cigarettes and 2 or 3 cans of chewing tobacco out of his cargo shorts and sets them on the hood of his car. The cop is not impressed and is like, "Son, you want to tell me why you have so much tobacco?" And I crap you not, with a straight face, my friend just replies,
Because I like a little variety.
In fairness to the cop, that answer sounds really shady. I can definitely understand why he thought you were covering for something. Last year, a few of my friends hosted a party at their house. The toilet got clogged and everyone just kept using it and layering toilet paper up, eventually rendering the toilet useless. So now everyone who had to pee did so in the bathtub. Same thing happened and now the bathtub is clogged. By the time any of the guys who lived there heard about it and walked upstairs to the bathroom to investigate, you have to walk past the laundry room to get there, they see a girl sitting on the dryer taking a tinkle in it. She claimed that multiple girls did it right before her, so she thought it was okay. In conclusion, girls are more disgusting than boys.
Why the frick didn't everyone take a tinkle outside?
It was a duplex-style house, they lived on the top floor and some of the girls lived below them with no interior stairs between the two, so everyone who came had to come up the stairs outside and into the second floor. The cops busted it and said there were probably 200 plus people there, all on one floor and on the steps outside. Not a lot of space to move, plus we live so close to our uni's campus, the idea is to keep everyone inside to avoid both university and city police shutting it down. I had a friend who lucked into a very well-paying job right out of high school. He would pay for hotel rooms to party in, and as we all still lived with our parents, it was a cool thing to do, I guess. We had a party one night when Nickelback was playing in our city, and the opening band was the Trues. We didn't really care about the show, we just happened to want to party that night. Around 2 AM I left the room for some reason, and there was one super drunk dude carrying a bus bin full of booze. He insisted I was the guy from the Trues and followed me back to the room and got us all a bit drunk. We kept saying that we weren't the Trues, but he really thought we were, and at the end of the night, well, early morning, he left and said he was a huge fan and it was an honor to party with his favorite band, and he drove all the way from Ontario to see us. So somewhere in Ontario, there's a guy who tells all of his buddies that he partied with the Trues. Oh, and another time my buddy shattered a hotel room toilet with 2 lesbians.
Can you elaborate on that last bit, please?
Well, we were a bunch of awkward dudes fresh out of high school. Sometimes the hotel parties were absurd and crazy, and other times it was just a bunch of guys sitting around laughing at our buddy for buying a hotel room for a bunch of dudes. The lesbian night was one of the more intense parties. A friend of mine found a guy we went to high school with on the bus with 2 lesbians. They were the last people to arrive to the already overcrowded hotel room and there wasn't much space left. The lesbians hung out in the bathroom, and the guy who brought the room, let's call him Jamie, really had to pee. They said something to him that involved him peeing in there while they watched. He went for it because beer, and nobody else went in there for about 20 minutes. After 20 or so, the 3 of them stumble out laughing and Jamie told me to go look. Sure enough, the whole gosh darn toilet was shattered. No blood or anything, but that thing was wrecked. He never explained how it happened, but I'm sure it was a good time. I think we got booted out of the hotel at like midnight that night, which was a record. To everyone in the hotel industry, I apologize for being that guest. We were young and dumb. I'm in the industry myself now, and anytime I deal with a real butthole guest, I know it's karma coming back. The host of the party decided to get into his unregistered car without license plates, without insurance, and without a license, and as drunk as the day is long. He drove the wrong way through a traffic circle, roundabout, and ran into a road sign. His best friend then screamed his name across the road, a neighbor called the cops, told them his name, etc. He was taken in and blood tested with 2.2 milliliters. He was let go, but he can't reapply for his license until 2018. Original post from 2014. Invite a friend over to drink late night. 10 minutes later, he calls us saying he's in the living room. He's nowhere to be found. I look outside to see 2 cop cars and his car in the neighbor's driveway. Turns out he walked to my friend's neighbor's house, drunk off his butt, asking where we were at like 2 a.m. A girl got drunk and passed out. Some guys pooped on her face and took pictures. This happened 2 to 3 years ago. She has a lot of Twitter followers now. High school, my house party. Guy asks me if he can shoot some other kid and shows me a gat. I tell him not on my property and not at my party. He apparently respected that. Later, he gets drunk and cuts his own stomach open, about 1 inch deep, 8 inches wide. You can clearly see each layer of skin and fat. He then goes around talking with it like it's Jim Carrey's rectum. We eventually convince him much later to go to the hospital, as he previously refused because he was afraid they were going to commit him to the psych ward. But by then, they told him it had been too long and they could only debride and dress it. He has a massive scar now, although he's much more sane and stable these days. 2 guys fought over a homely girl. One later pulled a knife on the other while he was asleep and attacked him through the neck. Stabber, blood alcohol content of around 0.3 if I recall correctly, has no memory of the event, and he did 15 years in jail. The stabbee had a blood clot, led to a stroke, led to debilitating brain damage. Took him about 10 years to recover his mental faculties. One of my best friends was thrown out of a window in the buff while doing the deed with a girl. Was he mid-coitus while in the air? I feel like you should have disclosed this. He gave a flying frick. So the whole story of this is that this is my best friend who just has women fall into his lap. Charisma out the wazoo. He goes to the club in town and winds up meeting a girl there. They dance it out, their feelings I guess, though a dance battle for supremacy could be cool, and he winds up going to a party with this girl. Well, apparently at some point at this party she told her friends that this other guy was trying something untoward towards her. And then later she dragged my friend upstairs for the doing of the deed. They're happily plowing away when the friends burst in, thinking that my friend is the other guy she talked about, committing the unspeakable act. Hijinks ensue, friend goes out the window, girl explains, and they let him back in. Now, I don't know if he kept his hard eggplant on this whole time, but I like to think that he came back in and then he came back in. This is also the guy who had a Ukrainian exotic dancer pull him into the shower to have fun with him. Some say she's still out there saving up funds to pull him into another bathroom and do it all again. I mean, I desperately want the entire life story of the defenestrated, charismatic Ukrainian dance seducer to be real, but dare I hope? It sounds too great to be true. I would kill for his autobiography if it is. Guy walked into the party and no one knew him. He walked around for a few minutes, then pulled out a piece, shot the refrigerator 2 times, and then calmly walked out. I live in Isla Vista, where basically Party Central is located on a street right on the cliffs over the ocean. I was at an AITA day party, everything is all good, people were intoxicated and having a good time. Then all of a sudden we hear screams and people start freaking out. Someone fell off the cliffs. Turns out it was my friend, who went over to his death. That was definitely one of the most crazy and traumatic experiences of my life, along with the shootings that happened here in Isla Vista last weekend. Moral of the story, don't pee off cliffs into the ocean when you are blackout drunk. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. College. Guy goes upstairs to pass out. Girl is already in the bed of his choosing. Amazing sounds of them doing the deed. Morning after, horrible screaming. Guy and girl turn out to be siblings. Was at a Halloween party and passed out on top of a cooler. I was awoken by my friend saying that the cops were there and we had to run. So my friend and I were dressed up as a geisha girl, Cinderella, Abby Cadabby, and Tinkerbell, all running down the road trying to avoid an MIP. We make it to a 7-Eleven and call my friend's boyfriend to take us home. He shows up dressed as Batman and intoxicated. He drives us home and on his way home gets pulled over and flees on foot. He then goes home and reports that someone in a Batman costume stole his Jeep and got away with it. Went to a house party freshman year of high school in Europe. It was this rich girl's apartment in a pretty high building, 10 to 12 stories. She lived on the top floor of this building, and after getting drunk and a little high, Towelie style, I started feeling pretty confident in myself. She had a small balcony and it was next to her neighbor's balcony, which was about a 2-meter gap of nothing all the way down in between. In my drunken stupor, I decided that moment would be the first time I said, "Hold my beer." I stood up on the handrail and jumped across to the other balcony and back completely drunk. The second jump really put how high up I was into perspective, when I looked down in the middle of this jump. Landed safely, but gosh, that could have ended poorly. Happened leaving a party. High school. 3 of my white friends went to juvenile detention and I didn't, even though I was in the same car busted for green herb. I'm black, but I'm also a smooth talker. More details, it was all their stuff and I barely even touched it, so I wasn't willing to take equal punishment for cruising with them. I was like, "Please officer, I haven't touched it, and I still have a curfew. If you're going to hold me, I need you to let me contact my parents." They called my mum to come pick me up. Friends say I wimped out. I say I played my cards right. Those officers probably tell that story all the time right before they say, "See, I'm not racist." Oh, that one was totally cool. It was so weird. I was messing around with my friend, beatboxing and white boy dancing to ourselves, and some black guys came over and started rapping to our beatbox. Then someone got shot and I ran to my car, but on my way a pizza place, Diamond Pizza, was closing and gave me free pizza. Yes, this happened in Philadelphia. On a break from college, my friends all got together for a small party. One of my best friends brought her new boyfriend that none of us had met. I guess he was really nervous and trying to show off because he challenged all the guys there to a shot contest in which he claimed he could take 3 shots for every one they took and still not get drunk. Well, you can imagine how that ended up. He got obliterated. Long story short, he ended up breaking a marble table. How? Choking out his girlfriend, our friend right in front of us, and ultimately pulling a piece on the guys that tried to drive him home, essentially creating a small-scale hostage situation in front of the house. Scariest night of my life, not knowing if my friends were going to get shot as we were hiding inside the locked house. Luckily, the cops came with no problems, and he spent a week or 2 in jail. I've got a few from just one night. My best friend, our substance dealer, was having a huge house party. Probably 60 to 70 of us there, nearly everyone tripping balls. Long story short, the cops have us all lined up against a wall, chewing butt and searching our pockets. Cop finds a little balloon full of white powder on my buddy next to me. "What's this, huh? You gonna tell me what this is?" My friend, screaming and spitting in the cop's face, "It's flour, you frickin' pig!" I was trying so hard not to laugh I was shaking. It was flour. We were stuffing it in balloons and playing with it. Almost 25 years later, we're still laughing about it. "You get the crime lab results back on that balloon?" "Yes, sir. They said they made gravy with it." I saw a guy on substances eat some other guy's ear. We were having the good old parties back in college when a guy went crazy. He literally ripped the dude's ear off and started munching on that little fricker. Someone called the cops and he was arrested. 2 years later, he was arrested again when a number of minors were found in his basement. Watched a girl get launched through the back of a car window. The evils of alcohol, man. It was a fight between a friend and her significant other at the time. Events like this happened frequently when they drank together, though never this serious. We were all out in the street. They were screaming at each other and swinging around violently. He just picked her up and threw her, through the windshield. This guy was pretty big, but my friend is also 5'1", maybe 100 pounds soaking wet. Somehow, she didn't press charges, but the police did. Lots of people were subpoenaed, but because everyone was too hammered to correctly or accurately recount the incident, it got thrown out. Oofed. When I hear about instances like this, I can see why so many people think that green herb should be the default party substance over alcohol. Whole new set of problems, but stories like this make you think at least the aggression would be toned down. The foreign exchange student from Sweden took too much of a certain substance and ended up dancing in the living room with his pants and briefs pulled down. There he was in the living room of a massive party with his tiny little eggplant swinging back and forth. He was kicked out and kept coming back dancing with his pants at his ankles. He came back the next day to apologize. It was his first week being a foreign exchange student at our school. Yes, a meme was made. The image is literally ingrained into my psyche. His eggplant was so small. I was at a going-away party for somebody I didn't know very well, but I knew many of the people that were there and they'd invited me. There were maybe 30 to 40 people there. About 2 hours into the party, a few of my friends and I decided to go and have a smoke on the front porch. I met the person that we were having the party for, I'll call him Chris for the sake of this story, and we seemed to get along nicely. Chris was a good guy. After a few minutes of conversation, he walked back into the house, leaving me and my buddies outside. That's where everything went nuts. These 2 girls had shown up to the party and nobody seemed to want them around. I didn't know them personally, but I knew that they were not the kind of people you'd want to associate with. I heard some arguing just behind me at the entrance of the house, a few feet away between the girls that just arrived and Chris. Chris was asking them very nicely to leave the party as they were causing a disturbance to the other guests. These 2 girls were having absolutely none of that and continued to scream utterly stupid crap into his face without listening to what he had to say. This went on for about a minute or so I started to ignore what was going on and just continued to talk to friends. Suddenly I heard a scream and somebody yelled, "You stabbed him, you crazy freaking B-word!" I quickly turned around and one of the girls had stuck a knife into his stomach and there was blood everywhere. The girl pulled the knife out of him and began to run down the street. The police came and rushed Chris to the hospital, but unfortunately he didn't make it and died in the ambulance. The girl was caught after about 2 days in the city next to mine. I went to court as a witness, as did many others, and the girl is getting 15 years in jail. I wish she got life because she deserves to rot. Come July and it will be 2 years ago that this happened now. In conclusion, I went to a party where someone was killed over asking these girls to leave his own going-away party. A friend of mine thought it would be hilarious to take a dookie hanging from a tree. So he climbed up about 25 feet, dangled by his legs around a branch, then proceeded to drop a huge fudge dragon right into the back of his white t-shirt that he was wearing. Rave party in a church. Some dreadlocked dude in a Jesus costume did the deed with a girl in the priest booth above the DJ stage. I was outside peeing in some nice bushes when I looked up and holy frick, Aurora Borealis. Living in Washington, this has never happened before. I proceeded to run inside to tell everyone, but they thought I was just drunk. In their defense, I was, and very enthusiastic, and making crap up. Their loss. Aurora Borealis, at this time of year, at this time of day, in this part of the country, localized entirely within your kitchen. So this one time, I went down to visit my friends in Cork. 2 of them were twins, and throwing an 18th. It was a great night, and everyone got really drunk. Around 4 a.m., everyone started to look for a place to sleep. Unfortunately, one of the rooms containing 3 beds and a few sleeping bags had been occupied by one of the twins and his girlfriend. So 14 of us had to all pile into one double bed. I was sleeping between one of the twins and another friend of mine. He was talking non-stop with some girl, but I didn't mind because I had somewhere to sleep. About 3:30, I'm talking to my friend when his face suddenly turns white. From behind me, I hear a slow creaking sound. It slowly gets louder. I was in shock. After a minute, he stops and I hear a sigh. I hold up my hand and he high-fives me, and that is how my best friend lost his virginity. In conclusion, friend lost virginity in a bed with 14 people, followed by a high five. In high school, after our track team won the county title, which we weren't supposed to win, we all wanted to get really drunk, but had nowhere to do so. That's when one of the seniors suggested that we drink at the abandoned house across the street from his. It wasn't really abandoned, it was fully furnished, just didn't have electricity on, and the owners had been MIA for a few months according to him. The party itself was pretty cool, a majority of the people brought lanterns and flashlights along with the hooch. It started getting out of hand, and at its peak about 150 people were there, which isn't really huge, but for our high school that was quite large. That's about when the cops showed up, which was standard practice for our parties. We all booked it, and since most of us were in peak physical condition, the cops pretty much gave up chasing us after a block. All of us got away, except my best friend. In his escape, he jumped out of a first-story window and landed on a cop. He pretty much just gave up at that point. Someone yelled, "Fusro da," and then loudly crapped themselves.
Please elaborate.
The guy had drunk like 7 shots of vodka in an hour. He had been giggling at the slice of the pizza he had dropped on the floor and then started crawling around on the floor. He yelled that and then crapped himself. It was pretty funny, but the smell was awful. What's the craziest reason you've had to fire an employee? Employee 1 wearing earplugs on a string. Employee 2 comes up behind Employee 1 and decides to yank on the string, which pulls earplugs out of ears very fast. This causes a vacuum in the ear canal and effectively pops your eardrums outward. It hurts real bad. Employee 1 got mad, yelled, and possibly cussed Employee 2. Employee 2 decides he doesn't like Employee 1's attitude about the situation. Employee 2, who's an amateur boxer, punches 1 to lay him out on the floor.
Employee 2 is a marvelous piece of work. All that amateur boxing must have knocked the sense right out of his head.
Before this incident, Employee 2 graced me with a conversation. Why he felt the need to say these things to me, I don't know. Maybe this lends legitimacy to the theory that he had the sense knocked out of his head. I think it just gives insight into a crappy human. Employee 2 was married and had a newborn or toddler. Apparently, his underage teen niece would babysit with another friend keeping company. Employee 2 indicated he thought both teens were hot and had a number of ideas about them that were extremely inappropriate. He slashed my tire after I told him to go to work instead of sitting in the break room.
He obviously didn't want to go back to work, so I think you did him a favor.
I gave my secretary a document that I wanted incorporated into a letter I had written, and she hucked the document like a frisbee into her trash can. It was literally my only copy, so I had to walk over and fish it out. That was her last day.
What the frick? Man, you must have more stories. How did she interview?
She was already there when I started. She worked for someone else but had problems with that person, so they tried putting her with me.
Who would have thought she had problems with another person?
Had an employee, a nurse, who was drinking on the job, snuck vodka in a plastic water bottle. We became suspicious when she began behaving erratically. Then we noticed that she was super possessive of her bottle and never let it leave her sight or let anyone else near it. She messed up and left it at her desk when she went to the bathroom. So we sniffed it and she was busted. Hot mess that woman was. Almost identical to my story at my job. She had an irreplaceable water bottle. One day in a downpour, she had to go out to her car to get her magic water bottle. Came back loaded and soaking wet. She never made it back to her desk. And here I am wondering if with that last sentence they mean that she was fired for being obviously loaded, or whether she didn't make it back to her desk because she hit on a coworker, tripped and fell and then spewed up in her handbag. I was part of a group of IT contractors together for a large international project. The client would get us apartments to live in at each implementation site for 6 to 12 months. A member of my team got into a disagreement with the CTO when he came to visit our site, which resulted in her screaming personal attacks at him in the hallway when he tried to step outside to de-escalate the argument. She was fired on the spot but then proceeded to go back to the apartment provided by the company and completely wreck it. The site was in the middle of the desert and she had opened all of the windows and doors, turned the AC on max, stopped all of the drains and turned the water on, threw red nail polish all over the bathroom. It was the most extreme breakdown in a professional environment I've ever seen. I never learned of any follow-up, i.e. legal action, I think because the CTO was embarrassed he had to ask us to check her apartment since he'd already left town. While I didn't fire her, I was offered the chance to work with her again 12 years later via anonymous reference, and obviously rejected her as a candidate. Think twice about burning that bridge, or at least how you do it. I once had an employee Snapchatting as he drove an ambulance with a crew member and patient in the back through an intersection during a red light. Rubbing a pregnant co-worker's belly 3 times after being asked to stop and then asking her if her husband was good at doing the deed. I fired him and he asked if we could still be friends. No. Then he tried to file for unemployment after only working there for 3 weeks, part-time.
We had a similar guy like that in our company. He was only with us for about 2 months before it happened. We were having our annual Christmas dinner and he was putting his arms around one of the managers all night and grabbing her hand when she got up to leave for the bathroom or whatever and asking her where she was going. He wasn't even drunk and he was asked about 5 times to stop it before she actually shouted at him in the middle of the restaurant. Didn't see him around after that night. One of our delivery drivers was supposed to be training a new employee, basically driving around and introducing them to routes and customers and that kind of thing. Well, he told the new driver to just drop him off at the park down the street, and when my boss drives the 15 seconds to the park, he was doing smack with local homeless people. Literally doing smack with hobos at the park. So of course the dude got fired. Then maybe a month later, we get a call from a customer saying that he was walking in the middle of a busy intersection with our company's shirt on. Guy had a crush on a female co-worker. He passed her a note at work one day with a gob of hand lotion inside it and the words, "I got really excited thinking about you earlier." The girl freaked out and went to management. The guy got escorted out. Had an employee pull a piece on me. This was after he got fired for threatening others at a Tier 1 help desk. Made everyone uncomfortable the entire time he was there. He's still in jail, it's been about 8 years now. I had an employee who got drunk on her lunch break, flipped her car, went to jail, mugshot with her company logo on her shirt. Perfect. Everyone is asking, our lunch break is 1 hour. Many employees leave to go out and eat. Potentially there were other substances involved. I work in pizza delivery and we had a guy back in the day, fellow manager, who tried to shut down the store 5 hours before the time that corporate set for us to close. He clocked every person out and sent them home and then just refused to take the phone calls or anything like that. He was fired immediately after our boss found out and he even tried to come into work the next day like everything was fine. We used to do crap like that at my store once or twice a year. We always said the oven broke down or the power went out. No one bothered to check and nobody ever got in trouble. We legitimately ran out of food multiple times and had to close because of it. I'd usually stay there and answer the phones because I think irate customers are the best thing ever. Picking up and telling them that everyone else is gone, I'm just there cleaning, and that we were completely out of everything on the menu, would usually get some sort of snarky, "Well, why did you pick up the phone?" kind of comment where I could just say, "To get it to stop ringing," and just wait for them to start cussing so I could hang up on them. Good God, I miss those days. As a former McDonald's employee, I can't imagine how on earth any of us would keep our jobs if we pulled some crap like this. I can't imagine any chain wouldn't be well regulated enough to stop this from happening under anything but the most extreme circumstances. I wasn't the manager, but watched the whole thing happen. A few years ago, I worked at a restaurant, and we had kind of an annoying new hire. One of those, "I'm too good for this" types. It was this kid's first job and first day out of training. One of his tables was a family with 2 small children who were being obnoxious, but hey, it's a family restaurant, that's expected. While walking away from the table, he muttered something along the lines of, "Shut up, you fricking kids." Except he didn't actually mutter, he spoke at normal volume.
The mother overheard and was not pleased. He was sent home and invited not to return.
I'm going to start inviting people to not come back to things. Congratulations, you've been invited to frick off.
One of our warehouse workers was a young man about 25 years old. He was suspected of having a substance problem, mostly because of absenteeism and that he just seemed off at times. One day, he called our office manager from the back parking lot of our building and said that he had an upset stomach and had pooped his pants. She told him she would try to find a change of clothes to bring out to him, but before she could, he ran into the building and into the bathroom off the lobby, trailing his accident smeared on his shoes onto the floor. He then took off the crap-filled pants and left them in the bathroom and ran back outside to his car. At that point, everyone else in the small office was running outside to escape the horrible smell. Our office manager found a pair of pants in someone's locker and took them to where the guy was parked, but turned around when she saw him standing beside his car with no pants or underwear on. While everyone else was figuring out how to deal with the doo-doo in the office, the guy got in his car and left. He showed back up 3 days later as if nothing had happened. He was told to head back home. I could never figure out why he ran inside. If you crapped your pants, wouldn't you just get in your car and drive home?
I once crapped in my pants on my way to work, had some chicken that didn't agree with me. This was the start of a very bad case of food poisoning. I just turned around and went home, called work and told them I had food poisoning. Paid my sister to use our carpet cleaner to clean my car seat. I don't trust my toots anymore.
I'm not the manager involved, but I think this fits the bill. A coworker of mine who was a little bit too into his car got snapped doing twice the speed limit. Instead of pulling over for the patrol car behind him, he decided to run for it. He led a police chase to the office and shook them off by hiding in the underground parking. The GM watched it happen from his office. He took the lift down, found the coworker's car, and told him not to bother getting out.
But did it clear his wanted level?
Yeah, but the stupid motherfricker ran over a cop leaving the garage.
He's gonna need to hit the paint shop.
Eggplant pic on the office cloud storage.
How did you go about identifying the culprit to fire him?
Luckily, it wasn't my job to do, but if I recall correctly, they identified him from the computer used to log in. In the details on the file itself, the type of phone used to take the photo, and the directory the file was in. There's a chapter from Let's Pretend This Never Happened about the author having to learn how to ask, "Is this your eggplant?" with a straight face while working HR for a faith-based organization that apparently had a problem with folks using their company emails to send each other eggplant pics. It's fantastic. For extra fun, there's a line from that chapter as follows. "Are these your Johnsons?" I highly recommend getting the audiobook as read by the author, Jenny Lawson. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Years back, a coworker got into some trouble for something and got called into the owner's office. A few minutes later, you hear a huge thump. The idiot broke his hand on the boss's desk during their disagreement. He got a police escort off the property. Worked as a bartender at a restaurant. I was cashing out a waitress who decided to enter the bar to
make herself a smoothie.
After fumbling around, she dropped a wine glass from the hanger and it smashed all over the counter. I told her she's going to need to clean it up before I can finish cashing her out. She then begged me that she needs her tips right now as her friend who she owes money to is waiting outside and that she was going to deliver the money, come back and clean it up. She never came back and I had to replace all the ice and all the fruit garnishes on a busy weekend night because of broken bits of glass that landed all over it. Of course, the manager comes over to ask why the drink tickets are 10 minutes long and I told him what happened. They immediately went into the schedule and gave all her future shifts to other people. The waitress called the restaurant not even 5 minutes later to ask why her shifts had been forcibly given away, and the manager replied, "'Cause you're fired," and hung up. Had an employee pass out in his truck in a customer's driveway. Customers called me to report said employee had a glass pipe on his chest. Luckily, guy decides to call me instead of the sheriff. The employee was picked up and brought back to the shop. When asked what was going on, he stated, "I was on a break, it wasn't green herb, it was just spice." "Sorry, bud, I don't think this is going to work out." "Spice? Do you spice? Are you looking for the Suncut Bazaar?" I see you critters answering these stories and I love it. Let me know below if you understood the reference. Fired a guy in his first week for browsing and downloading adult flicks at work on his lunch break. On a computer in a large room that other people worked in, at a government organization. So caught him red-handed, warned him not to do that, already thinking this guy will be fired at the end of the day, but have to go through the channels, was a weekend shift, And then 2 hours later, he does it again at the same place. At that point, I had the VP's approval to just fire him, and we'll deal with the paperwork on Monday. Let him go, he's shocked but doesn't say much. Being the only manager on site, I take screenshots of the sites he's visited, forward it off to HR and the VP to document it all. A few days later, the guy's father calls the VP to complain about his son being fired. Guy was in his mid-20s. Apparently, the fired employee never thought him being fired on the day he was busted for browsing adult flicks on a government computer in a government office was the reason to be fired. And he never told his irate father about this. So the VP deals with this very diplomatically, saying employee was viewing inappropriate content at work, was warned, continued bad behavior. Father doesn't accept the explanation, so the VP starts reading off the list of sites that were visited. All of them were hardcore sites geared toward large African-American women. Fired employee was Caucasian. The real kicker to this was that the VP believed that the fired employee was listening in on his father's conversation via another phone. Just as the sites were being read off, there was a very audible click of that phone being hung up. My husband is a manager, and his employee somehow had another employee's ID and then stole that person's check and cashed it. Caught it all on camera. She still denied it. In the legal field, that's called the shaggy defense. But we saw you sign the paper. It wasn't me. We even caught you on camera. It wasn't me. I hope this is a real thing between legal personnel. I had to send a guy to a remote gas and petroleum refinery site for an inspection. Previously, he had been reliable on most occasions. However, on this occasion, he never showed up for the pre-substance or alcohol test the day before he had to fly out and gave me a long-winded excuse, basically blaming his car troubles. At this point, I would have gone myself to the site, however, I was just back from a bone graft to my collarbone, so I wasn't going anywhere. The director made the final decision to send him anyway against my recommendations. We flew him to the site to do his on-site induction where he would do the D&A test anyway. Partway through his induction, he got up and left. I called him that night but never got an answer, so I checked his accommodation and the hotel claimed he had checked in within the last half hour. I was just glad nothing major had happened. Next morning I speak to the client and the client informs me that the staff member apologized for leaving abruptly and had to rush off and deal with some personal issues. I don't press it any longer. 2 hours goes by and I get a call from the client stating that they've kicked him off site because they've found him asleep on site, and when they woke him up, he became extremely aggressive. The client is furious about this and says we're a cowboy of an operation for sending someone like this and to fly someone up the next day to finish the job. That night, we have a conference call with the client, stating that we were no longer going to be working for them due to this issue, costing our company roughly $1 million for the loss of the contract. We bring him the day after he flies back to ask about his actions. I'm supposed to head this up and get his side of the story, except before we even really get into discussing things, my director asks, "If we were to substance test you today, will you fail?" He answers, "Yes." And he's told he's being terminated instantly. He starts yelling at the top of his lungs and blaming his actions on everyone else. I told him he needs to leave straight away or police will get called. He does. He leaves then for the next month, and our admin receives emails about how I'm terrible at my job and I should be fired for not listening to his problems, which he had never spoken to me about. So yeah, that was the day I fired my brother and found out he was addicted to crystal. There was a lot going on post his termination, and me and my dad combined to pay for rehab costs. He never stayed both times he was sent. Then there was physical threats of attack to my mum and my family for not giving him money. That's where I cut contact. Every update since has been from my dad. He hasn't seen my mum. He's working during the day and studying at night. I hope this time he can do well. As for the services that our employer offered, previously he had been given aid for counseling due to depression. Out of those 12 sessions, he had gone to 3. The situation gave me some pretty severe anxiety and depression. You can blame the plot twist way that I've written this due to the fact that I've just watched season 1 and 2 of Black Mirror over the last few nights. In auto sales, one of our salesmen always seems to be up to something. Between lying to all our customers, substance use, and constant fighting at home, he was impossible to manage. Unfortunately, he was the type that gave the rest of us a bad name. Eventually, he got into it with our GSM about several issues, and his go-to was to start making fun of our GSM's handicapped son. I had so much respect for our GSM, he took him in an office, told him he was terminated, and walked out, even though I know inside he was boiling with rage. I'm glad that guy's gone. And good riddance. Good gosh, did he want to be fired or something? It makes my mind spin that even if you harbor crappy opinions, you can somehow imagine that saying stuff like this won't get you fired. Not a manager, but I had to share my story. Worked at Jumbo Juice. Co-worker put bare hands into his pants and scratched his crotch at the register while helping a guest. When the guest commented, he put his fingers in the guest's face and said, "Smell it." "Smell that? That's the Jumbo."
Wow.
I had an officer under me. He was reported in a tree. I went to investigate the last place he was seen. He was still there, attempting to pepper spray birds. I wish I could have made that up. He was fired immediately.
What's hilarious is that pepper spray has no effect on birds. They can't taste it and it doesn't irritate their eyes.
I actually didn't know that. Good gracious. Put him below subpar.
Maybe that's why he was trying to pepper spray birds. Maybe he had heard it somewhere and wanted to see if it was true.
I own a tree removal service. Hired a guy as a ground worker. He worked great the first 2 weeks, didn't complain, seemed to know the work, and I paid him well. The third week working for me, we did a job that consisted of 2 big box elders to be removed. It was 95 degrees that day. I told the guys, don't push yourselves too much, make sure you're getting enough fluids, and if you need a break, take one. The new guy drove his own vehicle to the job as he needed to leave that day 40 minutes early to make it to a dental appointment. We're like 40 minutes into the job and I notice he's moving really slow. Just looked really unmotivated and like he didn't want to be there. We had the customer's driveway blocked off with brush everywhere. At this point, I'm still climbing in the tree and I see the new guy driving through the customer's yard, which was like 2 acres, and then onto the road in a serious hurry. I called him probably 30 times to make sure everything was all right. Didn't hear back from him. My other employees had no idea and were in shock. They saw him hop in his truck and just dart. He decided right then and there, "Frick this," and just left. Still haven't heard from him to this day. I didn't terminate him. That's the closest I would have come to firing someone. I don't know if I would have fired him if he'd showed up again the next day, but he would have had to do some pretty good explaining with a sincere apology for not letting anyone know and having the rest of the guys pick up the slack. My construction company was building a new addition on a hospital. One morning, the president of the hospital called to inform me that he had just watched one of our laborers doing smack in his truck while on break. Went to the job site, talked to the kid. He said, "Yeah, but I waited till break time." You aren't supposed to drive your personal vehicle to the job site for liability reasons. Oh yeah, and you're not supposed to do smack, even on a break. We've had some winners over the years, but that kid took the cake. This was definitely one of those situations that was not funny when it happened, but is hilarious now. One employee was dealing white snow from the back door. Another was high on smack and nodding off while standing over a fryer. Another went off on an admittedly rude customer and got real mean. "Your wife must be sorry she married you." One called me an N-word, I'm white, and spat at me when I confronted him about the fact that his dad came in to say hi to him when he was out of work because his dad had a heart attack and was in the hospital. And one just sat in the dining room and refused to go back to work because a hockey game was on TV. Restaurant management is fun. I was a blacksmith at a federal historical site and I used to make nails as a demonstration. I didn't see this, but another blacksmith was making nails and a lady remarked, "They didn't have nails back then, 17th century, to which the blacksmith replied, "Yeah, right, lady, they scotch-taped Christ to the cross." What terrible specimens have you had to endure for roommates? 3 weeks before I was to move out of a place, my replacement moved in. My roommate had apparently told her it was okay. So now 3 people lived in an apartment meant for 2. From what I could tell, all she did was sit on the couch and watch TV. A week before I was to move out, a friend of mine came over to help me pack. Apparently, the replacement thought I was moving out that day and that she could finally move into my room instead of sleeping in a common area. When she found out that wasn't the case, she got upset with my friend. Over the next week, she asked me repeatedly, "So when are you moving out?" I told her it would be at the end of the month because I couldn't move into my apartment until then. She said I should move out sooner. What I think happened is my roommate told her I was moving out the prior month and that I was overstaying my welcome. FYI, your former roommate was collecting double rent. That's usually pretty illegal. Mine told me not to bring my friends over because Asian people made her uncomfortable. One roommate would leave the house without their keys, not because they forgot them, but because he didn't like having keys. Ever. The request was to stop locking the door when I left the house. This is the second time I've read this. Like, do these people want to be robbed? I'll never trust someone like this. I feel like it's an elaborate plot to steal your stuff. Leave the door unlocked when you go out. Okay. And then they take your stuff with their friends. When I was in the dorms in college, I roomed with this dude who I didn't know. The guy played football and was about 300 plus pounds. Well, the problem is he wouldn't shower. Ever. Like no fricking joke. Our room smelled like hot mayonnaise and BO. I would spray and clean. Well, eventually, I got noseblind. This mother fricker finally got a girl to come to the room. When she asked him why it stank, I heard him whisper, "It's him." I fricking blew up. I asked old girl whose side looked like it would stink. My side was spotless, while his was full of half-eaten food and sweaty clothes. She ended up agreeing and leaving. The only cleaning he did was when he would come home from practice, take off his sweaty clothes, and then proceed to Febreze them and then go and take a nap. Luckily, the room was really big. Finn. I died inside when you said it smelled like hot mayo. You have my utmost sympathy as someone who hates mayo with every fiber of my being. And that guy sounds like a fricking douche. I probably couldn't live with the gentleman in question here, and frankly, I don't understand how anyone could. Surely there's someone you can go to and complain in the dorm situation like this. She told me I needed to stay somewhere else overnight because her new boyfriend was staying for the first time. I said if she had given me more notice, then I could maybe have sorted something, but she had told me 2 hours before I needed to leave. So what did you do? I told her I'd go out for some food, then when I came back I was happy to stay in my room. She shouted a lot about how unreasonable I was being, but that was still what I did. My freshman year in college, he insisted on having 2 box fans placed in our window, one facing in, one facing out, in order to circulate the air. Seems like no big deal, right? Until you realize that he insisted they be on full power every night of the year. Didn't matter if it was 100 degrees outside or -10. My bed was the closest to the window, and if I tried to get up to turn them off, he'd get hostile as frick. Frick that guy. Shove one fan up his butt and the other down his throat to circulate the air. 1% evil, 99% hot air. I use window fans, still do, even in January. I love and need very cold, moving air while sleeping. Sophomore year, my best friend at college really wanted to room with me. I knew my cold air thing would be a problem because every other girl I've ever met likes it very hot in their room, like 70+ degrees Fahrenheit. Like my freshman roommate kept it at 90 degrees plus, and she would crack the window to keep the radiators going at 90 degrees Fahrenheit. It was just horrible. Anyway, so I knew this would be a problem. I told my friend no, I wanted to live alone. She insisted she loved to sleep with window fans too, she loved the cold, blah blah blah. She kept asking for weeks. Eventually I said yes to rooming with her, with the clear understanding that I'd be using my window fan all year. Well, we roomed together and I used my fan, and January rolled along with frigid temperatures. My friend suddenly stopped speaking to me. I would ask her what's wrong and she didn't answer. She acted like I didn't exist. This lasted a couple of months before I remembered she had told me she had a blog. I looked up her blog and saw many posts dating back months complaining about what an awful person I am for freezing her to death with my window fan and how much she hates me for it. I was pretty surprised because she had never said anything. As soon as I read the blog, I asked her about it and she flipped out, went to the dean saying I'd invaded her privacy for reading her blog, and asked to be moved to a different room. She moved out and she never spoke to me again. So anyway, similar story to yours. I hope I wasn't the butthole here. I also wrote her a nice, long Facebook message right before graduation wishing her well, telling her what I admired about her and how she'd do great in life, and apologizing for losing her friendship sophomore year, but she never wrote back. I'm still puzzled. The fact that there is someone out there who can think they are rationally calling you the bad guy and hate you for this really concerns me. What the frick? When you repeatedly warn someone about it, they do it, and find out you're right, someone is a butthole and it isn't you. I have the master bedroom with the bathroom, and pay $65 more a month for this. My roommate, whose room is on my side of the house, gets to use my bathroom because we agreed he could. He lets his one-night stands and drunk friends walk through my room when I'm not there to use that bathroom, rather than the other one closer to the front door. I'm now missing 2 phone chargers and a pair of $100 headphones, but I'm missing them because I must have misplaced them. Can you buy a lock for your door? After that, our agreement would change. Not really a roommate, but a little stepbrother. He's 12. He wants to rotate beds from week to week. So I sleep in my bed, then the next week my stepbrother's bottom bunk, then the next week his top bunk. I don't want to sleep in either one of your beds, that's why it's called my bed. Just go to sleep. Explain to him that your sheets are full of your dead skin, farts, drool, pee, dribble, and that's why he shouldn't want to sleep in your bed. Then explain that his bed is full of his dead skin, farts, drool, pee, dribble, and that's why it's gross of him to ask you to sleep there. Well, now I don't even want to sleep in my bed. On move-out day, my sophomore year of college, I was cleaning my half of the dorm room. Mind you, the room had been a mess before. Both me and my roommate were very messy people, so the mess itself didn't bother us much. So cleaning my half took quite a while. But by the end of it, all of my stuff was packed in my car and I was ready to go. When I was done, my roommate said, "I'll have my stuff packed up in about an hour." I asked her why she was telling me that, and she said it was so I could finish cleaning. I took one look at her, set down the bag of cleaning supplies, and said, "Here's all the stuff you need." Then I turned in my key and left. Like heck I'm going to stay behind an hour later than I needed to mop the floor and clean the surfaces of your side of the room, when you did jack all to help me. Handed me $50 while asking me to get them green herb while they owed me $700 in back rent.
Now they owe you $650 and still need green herb.
Had a roommate in college who refused to take his keys with him when he went out to the bar because he didn't want a lump in his pocket. He would then come home after everyone else was already asleep, and when the doors were locked, he would start pounding on the door and shouting, "This is bullcrap! I frickin' live here!" until he woke someone up and got them to go downstairs and let him in. Oh, frick me, that would not fly. Oh, he would though, right down the fricking stairs. Yep, for me, the net result of that situation would be the purchase of some noise-cancelling headphones and a grumpy flatmate the next morning, because there's no way I'm getting up on a regular basis for a moron like that. Oh, I had a neighbor like that in a building once. At least once a week, for more months than I can remember, he'd come home drunk in the wee hours, beating on his door and screaming until his roommate let him in. One night he was so drunk he decided pulling the fire alarm was the best way to get his roommate to open the door. I wasn't invited to the blanket party that was held for him by some of the other building residents after he did that, but he moved out very quickly afterwards. What's a blanket party?
When a group of people beat someone with bars of soap in a blanket, it's usually used on someone who's hampered or held back or teed off an entire group. It's a percussive attitude adjustment tool.
We had several rooms and one was huge, meant for 2 or 3 people. It had a sink and 2 walk-in closets. After signing the lease, she announced that she needed the giant room to herself because she had PTSD and OCD. She wouldn't explain herself any further and threw a passive-aggressive tantrum for a month when we refused to cram ourselves into the 2 tiny rooms with 4 people so that she could have the big one to herself. We told her that she could be in the big room with another roommate, but she didn't want that. She just chose the small room eventually. We never heard the end of it either. It was always our fault that she was late to school because she didn't have a private bathroom and crap. Before you ask, yes, this person was in therapy, but according to her, she was in therapy because she needed to learn to be selfless and put herself first. She had frequently used that as an excuse to be selfish.
My therapist thinks I need to put myself first.
I roomed with another girl that was like this, but at least it was just me and her. She claimed because of her OCD and obsessive shopping, she needed a bigger room with the private bathroom and large closet. So I got the small room and shared the bathroom with guests and her, since it was closer to the living room and everyone used it if they were over. Since she used that bathroom too, I had to maintain it to a very high cleanliness standard for her. Meanwhile, her private bathroom was a pigsty. I had to pay 50-50 rent to get a much smaller room and share a bathroom. I was out of there when the lease ended the following year. Mental illness isn't an excuse to be a jerk.
Ugh, I agree. It's an insult to the millions of mentally ill people who are perfectly nice and considerate. Your roommate sounds terrible.
You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I had a roommate who moved out without warning about 2 months before my lease was up. She pretty much disappeared and left most of her stuff in the apartment. She also didn't pay up for her remainder of the rent. 3 years later, I get a phone call from her. I'm living 1,500 miles away and have been in several different apartments in several different states during the interim. She says I need to ship all of her furniture and belongings immediately.
What do you mean you dragged everything out to the curb the week after I left? You're a terrible roommate. You owe me for the value of my things.
I stopped answering her calls and eventually she gave up. I would have sold them all. Well, her stuff wasn't even that nice. Mine was adamant that I tried doing the deed with him. For clarification, I'm a straight guy and I didn't know he was gay. He said that I might like it, but I'd never know if I didn't try it.
I've had that phrase used on me too, from my best friend at the time.
How do you know you're not gay if you've never done anything gay?
How did you react? I kinda froze up and stammered something about how painful it would be without lube. Then I left. I don't think his family thinks much of me anymore because I didn't visit him in hospital a couple of months later when he was in a coma.
I don't think they know their son wanted me to top him either, so I don't blame them for being mad at me. I'd planned to spend my birthday evening quietly reading and watching Italian murder mysteries. Roommates announced that I needed to go make plans because they were having friends over and didn't want it to be awkward. The friends they were inviting were always so incredibly rude to me. So I smiled and said, sure, I'll make plans, and invited 3 of our neighbors and half of my creative writing class to eat cake and watch Italian murder mysteries. My crappy roommates had to go to their friend's apartment instead. He was a germaphobe and a bit stupid. He wanted all the other housemates to completely scrub the tub with cleanser after we took a shower, so he wouldn't come into contact with butt wash water or something else. We laughed at him and told him he could disinfect the tub himself before he showered if he was so worried. If someone has a problem like that, I'd happily spray down the shower after use. Just a small thing, but fricking scrubbing the entire bathtub? Frick that. Not me or any roommate situation I've had, but you know when you've had a friend complain about something and you only hear their side of the story? If you still think they're wrong, they must be extra wrong, right? My friend told me that her roommate forgot his keys at home one night. This sucks because he works late. He rings the doorbell, she wakes up all angry, opens the window and says, "Oh, that's too bad, but it's late. Go back to your office and sleep." Rather than just accept his apology and open the door, she told him to go back to his workplace, sleep there, and just come home some other time. She was telling me the story as if I'd be like, wow, the nerve of this guy trying to come home. Instead, my initial reaction was, man, that's freaking annoying that he woke you up, which very quickly changed to, what the whole frick is wrong with you though, by the end of the story. Not yet a roommate, but started making outrageous demands. There was a time I was leasing out the spare bedroom of my home and there were a few weird, crazy requests I got. An elderly lady thought the room for rent also included me taking care for her as a caregiver and driving her around. She also demanded I install ADA ramp on my porch. A couple who was so sure I would select them as a roommate, I told them of my no pets policy, went to my yard and started to plan out how they plan to fence off a section for their doggy. Hello lady, this is my home. They got mad when I told them I was turning down their application. FYI, I have nothing against dogs, I have cats that happen not to play well with others, hence the no pet policy. Had an actual roommate that refused to pay the bill because she was broke and would close the door on me and expected me to pay for her part. Yet she was out all night partying and getting expensive weaves. She left her email open at my PC and I saw the cost. Told her I can't pay her part and she'll get evicted if the rent is not paid on time. She left a week later. You'd think the crazies would have it in their best interest to hide their eccentricity right up until the move-in. In my experience, that's what they usually do anyway. I moved into our first 3-person dorm room, so I picked the prime bed. None of us knew each other before this, we were all in a bind for housing, and lo and behold, she and her family shows up and gives me the stink for having the gall to take the good bed. I get along really well with my other roommate, but this girl started using all of our stuff and staring at us when we slept or did homework. We got ants because she never cleaned the kitchen, but she would hide dirty plates and bad food in the back of the very deep pantry instead of cleaning or throwing it away. She wouldn't let us have friends over but felt the need to talk loudly on the phone at all hours. I lost it when she left a pair of sweatpants on the floor of our shared closet with actual crap in them. We searched for a different room for her and made her move out. I still have the hate letter she wrote me the day after she left. I met my first roommate on Craigslist. First red flag, I guess. I wasn't allowed to keep my music above volume 10 after 9 or 10 p.m. She, however, sang gospel songs loudly in the living room until 4 or 5 in the morning. Every single day. I had to open my mail in front of her, otherwise she'd open it because it looked important. Aside from this being totally illegal, why the frick do you need to read my bank statements? She'd text me when I got Amazon packages. "Oh, your shoes got here," because she'd open it and dig around before I got a chance to. She never cleaned, as in her mother still came over every weekend to clean her bedroom and bathroom. She had let her trash accumulate near her spot on the couch throughout the week. Clearly didn't give a crap about her living environment, but God forbid I put the television remote anywhere besides the right arm of the couch. I wasn't allowed to turn the heat on in the winter. To save money. I live in the mountains of North Carolina and the winters are pretty harsh. She would rather freeze than pay an extra $15 per month. Over the summer though, I wasn't allowed to open the windows, so no one breaks in. My apartment was either in the 50s, 60s, or the 80s. She didn't like it when I used the kitchen to cook, strange, but she would hand wash her period panties in the kitchen sink, even though we each had a private bathroom. Frick you, Rebecca. I had one roomie announce one day that he was going to stop paying his share of the rent. I explained that no rent equals no room. He thought that was unreasonable and went around telling people I was cold. What a butthole.
He wanted his girlfriend to move in rent-free. This girl used my cookware and never cleaned it. She took forever in the shower. We put an end to that real quick. My current roommate. I own the house and did a buttload of work to clean out the garage so I could turn it into a man cave. He did absolutely jack to help, and most of the work was cleaning up piles of recycling he never took out. Now it's cleared, he wants to park his car in there. But there's actual stuff taking up half the garage, so he would only be able to park in there while the other roommate and I park on the street and not use the driveway so that he can get in and out. He thinks I'm being unfair by not letting him park in there. Also, he cooks and never cleans, and has more than once let leftovers rot in my Tupperware and then thrown it out instead of cleaning it and not replaced it. This happens every time I move in with someone. Every single time. They tell me I don't do any dishes ever, which is very true. What I have to keep reminding them is that I have one plate, one bowl, one fork, one knife and one spoon. Keep them in my room at all times. Always wash them immediately after I'm done using them and bring them right back into my room. Always hilarious to hear their response. Listen guys, I have one single cup that I drink from every single day. I wash it before I fill it up for the day. I wash my pots and pans right after I'm done cooking, and my plates and silverware after I eat. The other 14 dirty glasses on the counter and sink full of week-old dishes are yours, and I'm not fricking washing them for you. I absolutely hate when people rotate who does the dishes, and then your dumb as frick roommates manage to use 4 glasses, all the pots and pans, and every available piece of silverware in like 5 hours. What in the holy frick are you cooking that makes so many pots and pans? Had an actress roommate who on random Saturdays and Sundays said she needed the entire apartment to herself to study her lines. I rarely had anyone over to begin with as I was usually out and about, but this particular Sunday there were like 4 of us in the living room watching Mythbusters. I only include this to show that it's not like we were watching NFL and screaming or shouting or being drunk. She legitimately thought this was not okay and that everyone else should leave to accommodate her. Anyone who thinks like this should live by themselves. I'll never understand how people who want to split costs to save money still think people should accommodate them. When I have roommates, I realize that if I want peace and quiet, I sometimes need to remove myself and go to the library or something. That's the price you pay to save money. It wasn't my roommate's unreasonable demand, but it was my roommate thinking my request was an unreasonable demand. My roommate and I rented a house together and the garage was pretty close to the living room. One day I was watching TV when I heard what sounded like something smashing into the garage. I waited a few seconds and went outside to see that my roommate had hit the garage with his truck and was chilling in his car texting. His car was still touching the garage. I told him to back up and he got really upset that I'd asked him to do that. Luckily, the damage was minimal, but what the frick, man? When I was a freshman in college, I lived in a dorm suite with 4 other girls, 3 single rooms and 1 double, which I shared with a roommate. One of the girls who lived in the single rooms was a real piece of work. Every slight change in the suite would drive her nuts, and she'd always be knocking on our door demanding an explanation for some minute thing or another. One time she knocked on my door only to show me a tiny scrap of ham and a piece of cereal pinched between her fingers. There was meat and cookie crisp on the kitchen floor. "Is this yours?" "Yes," I said. "You can throw those away." I also came home to her crying in the living room once because of another of our suite mates put a monster poster on the front door for a Halloween decoration, and it scared her. I guess those things don't sound too crazy out of context, but she'd knock to tell me she'd moved my food from the table to the counter and just general tiny stuff like that. Very strange. Parents, when did you realize it wasn't just teenage hormones? Your kid was just a bad person. My parents are realizing what I've known about my sister for years now. She's on the hook for $60,000 in student loans and such, after failing out of 2 colleges for rampant drinking, and refuses to do so much as her exit counseling for them. Parents have co-signed everything, and Mum says that every call she makes there ends in shouting because it's screwing up their credit. Because she lives a couple of states away from them now, she thinks she can get away with it. Mum says they're thinking of taking her to court over it. My sister was in this situation a few years ago. I fully sympathize with you and your family. In the end, we threatened to take her to court over the damages she caused to the household and credit, and it scared her into behaving. In the end, however, she nearly ended up in prison, did community service, moved to a different country. I saw her for the first time in years a couple of months ago, and she's finally grown up. She's now 28. Finally. My dad makes a good living that allows my mum to be a stay-at-home mum. As a stay-at-home mum, my mum's only real job is to be the maternal figure of the house.
Needless to say, she goes all out. Well, in elementary school, my mum would pack me and my brother extravagant bag lunches, amazing sandwiches with all the cookies and chips any middle schooler would love. One day, my mum started to notice that my little brother was coming home super hungry after school and that he had eaten all of his lunch, yet he was still dying of hunger every day at 3 o'clock when he would walk through the door. My mum asked him why he was so hungry, and she suspected he was getting bullied and his food was getting taken by some of the older kids at school. He's pretty small. Well, since he didn't say anything, my mum called his teacher and had her look out for him. My mum got a startling call not more than a week after her inquiry. My younger brother was gathering the fat, poor, hungry kids who didn't have money or were still hungry for food and was putting on a hunger talent show. He would make the fat kids dance for his food and the poor kids do weird jackass-like stunts for it. When my mum heard, she was devastated. She had spawned a real little butthole. Years later, he's a successful lawyer with a beautiful family, but still a fricking butthole. Your brother is President Snow? At first, I thought this was going to be a story of him donating his lunch to the less fortunate and was wondering how that made him into a butthole. My brain had trouble fathoming the depravity of the reality of this story. That he turned out to be a lawyer is no surprise. When he was 3 years old, I was napping on the couch when he came up, opened a bottle of water I had next to me, poured it on my crotch, and asked me why I'd peed myself. I mean, that's definitely not teenage hormones. Given that I anticipate a lot of tragic stories of broken families, toxic relationships, and general depressing content in this thread, I thought I should include this monster who soaked their parents' crotch. I'm sure there's like a 50-50 shot that they aren't the devil reincarnated. When my mum called me asking if I could track down my sister's baby because she had abandoned it. My sister has 5 kids, 2 were with their father, but she had the other 3 with other people. My mum got a call from the twins' babysitter saying she hadn't heard from my sister in a few days, and was wondering when my sister would be coming to pick her kids up. My mum called around and no one could find my sister or the baby. So she went to pick up the twins and their babysitter suggested that the baby might be with a woman whose name she could only partially remember, but who she'd heard was babysitting the baby from time to time. So my mum frantically called me asking if I could use the magic of the internet to track this lady down. I used online yellow pages, Facebook connections, and just cold calling a lot of the people asking, "Do you have a baby?" I finally got a hold of the right person who said, "I was just about to call the cops. I thought I was going to be babysitting for a few hours and it's been 2 days. My mum went and picked him up, and my sister hadn't even dropped off any clothes with him. In conclusion, my sister basically just said, "This is too much pressure for me," arranged for babysitters for the 3 kids, and left town. My mother was convinced at that moment that she had raised a sociopath. My mum forced her to have her tubes tied, and then won the custody of the baby, and the babysitter of the twins became their foster parents and will probably ultimately adopt them. My sister got remarried and joined the army. We're all just waiting for her to either get kicked out, start cheating on the new guy, or whatever. My grandson is in kindergarten. Last week he threw his lunchbox at his teacher because he wanted to see what would happen. Journal entry for March 1st, 2013. Week-long detention hypothesis confirmed. As I discussed last week, I hypothesized that throwing a lunchbox at my teacher's skull would result in at least a week detention. Not only was that confirmed, but I was also grounded at home. I suspect the adults have some sort of reason to prevent injury, an odd custom. I propose that other weapons beside a lunchbox would elicit a similar response. Regardless, this was a small sample size. I plan on recruiting other children in other classes to test this hypothesis. Of course, we will need to double-blind these experiments as well. Next week, I will try a knife. I did similar stuff as a young child. I'd throw crap at people or hit people to get a reaction, but that all changed when I threw a snowball at a bigger kid who proceeded to shove my face in a snow mound. I was 5. He was also 5, but bigger. When my cousin slapped our grandmother, for no reason. For those wondering, this cousin is male. Also, I wasn't there to witness it, but family members referenced it. His apparent reason was, "She was bugging me." That's not much of a reason to me, so I just say he's being a butthole. He's my fiance's kid, but he lives with us, and I deal with him 80% of the time. I knew shortly after I met him 2 years ago what a butthole he is. He's constantly lying about stupid crap. He is entirely self-absorbed, he screams and rages over the dumbest stuff, and threatens to take his own life if you try to make him do the dishes. He got expelled from school for threatening to shiv a kid with a broken pair of scissors because that kid asked him a question. He then proceeded to tell us that the principal was a lying B-word and that she and all the other children at school were trying to frame him. As far as he's concerned, the entire world is out to get him, and everyone else is fricked up, and if you call him on his crappy behavior, he threatens to take his own life. Take yours, or call the cops to frame you for inappropriate behavior with a minor. He's a butthole to the extreme, and no one really wants anything to do with him because of it. We've had therapists that have literally refused to see him again after only 1 or 2 sessions. He's 12. My son, who was 25 at the time, blamed me for his unemployment because I spent too much money on him when he was a child. My older sister cheats on her husband constantly, is rude as frick at almost all times, and has been this way for her entire life. My mother still refuses to acknowledge that she's a legitimate butthole and always has been. Does her husband know? If not, are you considering telling him? I should have clarified, the husband knows. He knows everything. It's a strange situation. My sister is a user. She spent months, years back on MySpace, looking for a husband. Basically, she used her time to look for someone to take care of her. She's always been very manipulative and sort of the black sheep of our family. Anyway, she wrangled herself an Air Force guy. My sister is an attractive lady, but her husband is most definitely not a good-looking guy, and I'm positive that she's used this as an angle of sorts to keep this ruse going. She doesn't do crap, but spends his money and cheats on him. And because he's too much of an insecure pansy, he won't take charge and leave her. Worst part of all is now there's a gosh darn child involved. Fricking A. I don't know if my 13-year-old is a butthole just yet, but last week he was suspended for running up to a kid at school who wasn't looking and smacked him across the face super hard, while he was videotaping it with his phone, no less, and then uploaded it to Vine and Twitter. And then he said he was just joking around. I'm also starting to think he's a little dumb because we live in Steubenville, Ohio, and if there's one thing the kids there should have learned, it's that you get in a ton of trouble for doing illegal things involving social media. That was a trend in the UK about 5 years ago, except it was called happy slapping. Sometimes the best love is tough love. If you keep giving him the benefit of the doubt, he can get away with it and will continue to do that in the future. My little brother is a butthole and my parents know it, and to keep him from having a fit, spoil him all the time. Fit as in foot stomping, blood-curdling screams, cursing, etc. He's 13. I despise him greatly. The narrator is hoping for the sake of these families that just for the general spoiled behavior, 13 is still a little too young to judge whether the kid is a lost cause yet. I say this specifically because there seem to be a lot of 13-year-olds in these stories. Case in point, I have a 13-year-old grandson that we moved 750 miles to help raise because our daughter passed away. At first we thought he was just having a hard time coping, as we all were, but lately the non-appreciative attitude and the you owe me attitude has been very loud and disrespectful. No matter what he gets or doesn't get, it's never enough. His demands are not those of a normal child. We raised 4 and assisted some with all the grandkids. He speaks to us like he's grown and never gets quiet or even attempts to show respect and listen to what we have to say. 13 and wondering every day. I'm a teacher who works with middle schoolers every day. Remind them that the only thing they're entitled to is the air they breathe and maybe some food to keep them alive, and clothing to keep their body temperature from lowering below 98 degrees. And if he acts like a butthole, take away everything except for the essentials. Kids who think they're owed everything grow up to be adults to think the same way. Not so cute when you're 30 with the maturity of a 7th grader. And if you do this, be very matter-of-fact about it. Not angry. They sense anger as weakness and try to push your buttons. Be calm as though you're talking about the weather, and no matter what, follow through. The one time you don't will be your downfall. My stepson has autism, which makes it tricky because sometimes autism can look like behaving like a butthole in certain circumstances where social skills are a challenge for them. But the truth is that people with autism have good personalities or bad personalities, just like anyone, and my stepson is a butthole. He's a selfish bully who looks for victims. He takes his anger out only on people who cannot or will not fight back. He has fantasies about violence with children smaller than him. He's come after me with a butcher knife. On and on. He's a lot like his biological dad, who lost custody of his kids because he slugged his little girl and threatened to take his wife's life. He's an administrator at a Christian college, by the way. My stepson is out of the house and in a home group now. I really loved him. I tried so hard to help him. We got so much professional help, and yet he is who he is. Good parenting can do a lot, bad parenting can too, but in the end, you just are who you are. Any changes that can be made need to come from you. Nobody can do it for you. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe.
My son is only 10 and is in no way a butthole, but my father had 7 kids. I remember him saying, "You have until the age of 12 to teach your kids. After that, they become buttholes for the next 10 years.
This thread is making me love birth control even more than I already did. My wife and I are still hoping it's the hormones and not his lifelong personality. When I was in high school, I was showing my mom a few signatures in my yearbook. There was one signature that I had gotten as a joke. The guy was not popular or attractive, followed me around like a puppy, had gross habits. I was telling my mom about the guy and was laughing about getting him to sign my yearbook. My dad overheard all of this and said, "You're a fricking jerk butthole, girl. You're the butthole girl who everyone secretly hates. Frick you for treating that guy like that. That's really something to be proud of, you jerk." I felt guilty about my actions toward the guy ever since. As an adult, I go out of my way to not do the popular thing and to not follow others, to not treat people differently. I was trying to be popular that time in high school by treating someone like scum, and my dad changed my entire outlook on life by pointing it out and by yelling at me that evening. I don't have kids, so I thought I'd point out the moment when I was the jerk. I was actually in the reverse of the situation, realizing that my parent was a legitimate butt. I was bullied in school quite a bit as a kid. During that time, I wasn't living with my parents, I was living with my grandparents. When I moved back in with my mother, I realized how differently she acted behind closed doors than I was used to. Emotional bullying, PMDD, anger management issues, hormonal imbalance. I started to ask about her childhood. She told me stories about how she and her best friend would terrorize people and bully other girls in school. In one example, leaving dog crap in a birthday gift box at the foot of a girl they particularly liked to torment, until she eventually transferred. She had a few stories like that she would tell with a laugh like they were totally normal and hilarious. In conclusion, my mum is the answer to the question, what becomes of the childhood bully? My friend is one of these legitimate buttholes. His parents are very nice people. I get on great with them. The problem lies that they were very fortunate in life with money and never put their foot down with my friend. He always got his own way. If he wanted something, he got it. He refused to go to university, but his parents really wanted him to. He then went to uni on the basis that they would pay for a year's travel expenses for him. A term into uni, he got his parents to buy him a car, otherwise he would drop out. I put friend at the top because he's actually a really nice guy up until his teenage years. It was around this time that his dad's business rocketed. My other friend and I are only friends with him because sometimes he can still be nice. We give him crap about being horrible to his parents though, and he doesn't take it on board. Maybe the combination of his puberty hormones and parents' wealth happening at the same time wasn't a good thing for him. We all have that friend who transforms into a flowering prick overnight. What's worse is that they go on to live successful lives, until they crash and burn at 33 because they have no real friends. My mum's just figured this out with my little brother. He's 18 and just moved to uni. Me and him haven't gotten along for a long time. My mum has defended him for years, claiming he's just fiercely independent and enjoys his privacy, but I've considered the behavior obnoxious for a long time. If you ask about how he is, he flips out because it's not your business. If you have a conversation and he disagrees with you with something, he will not respond to any evidence that supports you and will belittle and patronize. Yeah, sure it is. Oh yeah, right. But that's just how he is. He has zero empathy. If something is going wrong in someone's life, he becomes Mr. Hindsight, absolutely emotionless and again, condescending and belittling. There is no such thing as opinion or grey areas in his world. If he's seen someone's life go to crap through green herb use, then all green herb use is terrible and the medical Mary J idea is bullcrap. If he likes a band, they're good, and if you disagree, not only are you wrong, but you're a little piece of crap he's found on his carpet. But he just can't communicate very well. He doesn't really mean what he's saying. Try and listen better. So he went to uni and hasn't called my mum except to ask her for help moving from one room to another. She is obviously worried. He's the baby and now her and dad have an empty nest and she misses him. So she texts and emails at most once a day, just asking, "How are you?" rather than calls. She doesn't want to disturb him. She doesn't get replies usually, but then she's got this horrible email back. "Stop trying to invade my life. You're not involved anymore. It's none of your business. Just leave me alone." I think she's realized that it may just be how he is. But how he is a butthole. She's still trying to defend him a little, but when I talk to her, it's easy to hear the hurt in her voice. She's always been there for this little brat, much to my annoyance, as she's always sided with him in arguments. I know he's yelled at you for the last 30 minutes, but did you ask him how school was? But hearing her this upset is awful. I think she's always hoped that once he got more independence, he'd relax a bit. He always felt trapped in our hometown, but it's gone the other way. I honestly don't think he has any intention of being part of the family again. He's previously told me that if I or he ever have kids, they're probably not going to meet each other, and that looking after my parents is probably going to be my responsibility. I don't overly mind, but I know it's going to kill my mum. Yeah, I knew that there would be a lot of sad stories like this when I picked the story group, and here is maybe our most detailed example. Heartbreaking. I have a son who I thought was a butthole from a very early age. He could give you a look at age 2 that made you deep down want to punt him like a football. Like it triggered some old, deep part of the brain that we don't use anymore and actually made you angry just by this look he'd give you. After a while, it no longer bothered me. I figured he was just born a butthole. Then at age 6, after many specialists and tests, he was diagnosed with Asperger's. With proper treatment and understanding, he's now only casually a butthole, but getting better. I started reading this out of curiosity. Funny how so many are not from parents, but from siblings and other relatives. My cousin supposedly locked herself in the bathroom after an argument with my uncle, called the cops and claimed that he, along with my aunt, were being physically inappropriate. She asked to be removed from the home and she was moved into a foster family. She still came to all family holidays and insisted on sleeping in my room. I have a trundle bed, so a spare bed underneath my bed, and she would wait until I left the room and would steal from me. On 2 separate occasions, my MP3 player and my Game Boy Color, along with all the games, were stolen. She lived 4 hours away, so when my aunt eventually found them, I had to wait for them to be mailed back to me. She was a proclaimed animal activist and vegetarian. Only when it was convenient to her, though. I've been a vegetarian for 9 years and we always had veggie food in our house. She was always just an awful person. I've been planning my wedding for almost a year now. She got engaged and within a month, she stole my future wedding date. Seeing a lot of the stories here, I'm recognizing myself at that age and I feel like it's worth reassuring the parents in this thread that it may not always be like that. Looking back, there are so many things I did in middle school and high school that I really regret and that I feel terrible about now. I could have easily been considered a butthole, I think. I'm now in my 4th year of university and I consider myself to be a much better person than I was back then. I know that I caused my parents a lot of grief then, but seeing how things between us have gotten better makes me happy. So you shouldn't give up hope at such an early age. Sometimes all it takes is for your kid to grow up and earn some experience in the real world. I saw the exact moment on my uncle's face when he realized his son was a butthole. He had been getting into trouble, little chicken crap stuff, then he gets busted for statutory. So my uncle, who used to be a police officer, calls in every favor he can to get the charges dropped. He hated what his son did, but it was his son and still felt he had to look out for him. Then, the very night his charges are dropped, the moron goes out and gets arrested again for the same crime. No help the second time. Now he deals blackjack at a casino and has a gambling problem. The tragedy is, he used to have so much potential. My parents told me that I was a crappy kid my whole life. It wasn't until I was in my 20s that I was able to reflect on this and realize they were just narcissistic buttholes who don't like children. My dad used to tell me I was the most selfish person he knew. I did the family laundry, cooked the meals, cleaned, got all A's in school, and never did drinking or substances. Sorry I sometimes needed time alone. I realized my younger brother was a butthole when he was 3 years old. He had been hitting, biting, kicking, and generally bullying my 2-year-old brother, and my dad's response was, "Boys will be boys." Anyway, my 3-year-old brother was mad at the youngest for some reason. He pushed the baby onto the tile floor and proceeded to take violent action against him. Needless to say, the baby was rushed to the ER, where my dad claimed the baby had just fallen over. This sort of abuse is still happening. They're 15 and 16 now. The only difference is my dad tells the oldest not to leave marks because CPS has been called multiple times throughout their childhood. One time I caught the oldest trying to engage in inappropriate behavior with the other, and I was so angry I beat the crap out of him. I told my family and was going to call the cops, but they informed me if I called the cops, I was dead to them. The butthole is the golden boy and can do no wrong. He's the spitting image of my psychotic father. I thought my 13-year-old was up to some crap. A couple of days ago, I saw him unlock his phone. He went to practice and I gave in to curiosity. He's actually a really nice and cool nerd. I figured I was already a crappy parent for looking, so I browsed it all. texts, Facebook, and Instagram. It was all chatter about sports, video games, and horse masks. His pics were of his siblings and passed-away grandmother. I felt horrible for not trusting him. What blew prisoners' minds about life outside after serving long sentences? My cellie was locked up for 20 years before he was in jail with me. He got locked up again for beating up somebody who was talking crap at a bus station. The guy he beat up was actually talking to someone else on a Bluetooth headset. About 10 years ago, I was unemployed and went to one of those employment centers looking for a job for the first time in a long time, which ended up basically being some sort of internet cafe where you use the computers to job search, create resumes, and other stuff. I sat down by an older gentleman who just stared into the screen with his hands in his lap. An employee came by and asked him if he needed help, to which he agreed and stated he had been incarcerated for about 30 years and had never used a computer. She sat down and told him to use the mouse to move the cursor to an icon, etc., etc. This dude gave the mouse a sharp jab with his finger like he was pushing an elevator button. That slid the mouse across the mousepad and onto the table. The look on the lady's face was priceless when she realized she had to teach this guy how to use a computer from ground fricking zero. She was puzzled where to even begin. My dad is a prison chaplain. One of his inmates had been in for about 30 years and got out last year. My dad got a call from him a few days later. "Chap, did you know they have toilets that flush themselves?" My mother just got released after a 15-year prison sentence. The weirdest thing to her is the cell phones. She thinks it's crazy that everyone is attached at the hip to their phones, and that you can look up anything in an instant. Also, gas prices. They definitely threw her for a loop. She offered to gas my vehicle up because I helped her run some errands. She didn't realize it was going to cost $50. She also thinks it's wild that my brothers and I can play games together and not be in the same house. The first time she called in and I told her I was playing Destiny 2 with my brothers, she thought they were actually in the living room with me. It still freaks her out that we live in different states and can play together. That one was posted in 2015 and is likely a result of equal parts the time locked away and the classic parents are confused by technology issue. Online games were still kind of a thing in the 90s and noughties. I was told this story by an ex-felon who had a cellmate that finally got released after 30-plus years in prison. He gave the guy his phone number because he knew that transitioning into the real world would be rough. He went on to say that he got a call from his cellmate at a grocery store in a corner, crying because the selection in the store was too much for him to handle. Mostly the different varieties of items, different brands have grown in the past 30-plus years. Also, the use of self-checkout machines can be confusing. I learned about this in Business 101 in college, that if you overwhelm your customer with too many options, it leads to lower sales. Sometimes that happens to me in a grocery store. Too many options, so I buy nothing. Like having a library of hundreds of Steam games, and after an hour of deciding and playing the first 5 minutes of a few, you play nothing and go back to Reddit. Saw a dude on the news who'd been in jail for like 50 or 60 years. He said the craziest thing was seeing all the crazy colored Gatorades. And he thought everyone was an FBI agent because of their earbuds. I remember working at McDonald's and having an ex-convict come in and being outraged at the prices. A Big Mac was twice the price he was used to. Not a felon, but I did have a lengthy phone call with an ex-con at work once where I went in circles trying to explain the concept of attachments to emails. I also had to explain that fax and email were separate things. What's she in for? You know how your mother always said, "I brought you into this world, I can take you out of it too"? Well, his mum tried it. Was at the corner store and some guy walks in with his buddy who was acting a little weird. He points to some Red Bull and asks, "What are those?" His buddy tells him, "They get you jacked, like amped up, get you going." His buddy left with like 5 of them. I'm assuming he just got out of lockup. It gave me a chuckle. I work with a lot of felons. One of them had been in prison for 38 years. He said everything is different. The cars are so different and quiet. Everyone is on their phones, and phones are weird. People have phones in their pockets. Vehicles definitely were a lot noisier in the older days, and street scenes were a bigger assault on your ears. I remember it from the early to mid-90s, and I've also seen archive footage from the 60s and 70s where it's slightly worse. 38 years presumably also means that he went from having never used a credit or debit card to a world where a lot of people don't carry cash and buy things online. I feel like long-term prison is actually a form of time travel. I went to rehab a few years ago, and one of the guys there with me just got out of prison after a 20-year sentence for being a huge crystal dealer.
He said cell phones blew his mind, and he's so confused about gas pumps now because of the option to pay with cards at the pump and how different they look. Just wait until he sees one with a frickin' TV in it. I knew a guy who was in for around 15 years. I told him I like video games, and he was asking if I had a chance to play this or that game on PS2. I said I didn't, and he said I should get it. They weren't classics or anything, but sports games that came out at the time. In 2015, I met a guy who went into jail in 1997 and had just got out. The big thing he noticed was that there weren't many large groups of youth out and about like when he was a kid. He said the saddest thing he saw was going to the local park and seeing almost nobody there at 6 p.m. When he went in the 1990s, there were typically around 50 to 60 young people hanging out, skating around and socializing. He said people weren't out on their stoops socializing as much. He doesn't see nearly as many people out and about on Friday and Saturday nights. I suppose the way we socialize has changed so much since then. Back then, the only way you could socialize was by leaving your house and hanging out with your friends. Even doing nothing with friends was preferable to just hanging out inside. Today, people don't do that as much. This is also the biggest thing for me. Youth used to be absolutely everywhere and aren't really out as much. The thing you said about parks and stoops is so true. Parks used to be always filled with large groups of young people aged 16 to 28. And now they're all empty or near empty. I don't know the reason why they aren't out, but youth culture in general just doesn't seem to be there the way it was in the 1990s. A reason is probably because parents nowadays don't want their kids running around at night, especially in winter. They don't want their children out late and without a parent watching them. Whenever I used to go to the park, it would always be before tea or it would be a lunch event with friends. Now, a lot of people will hang out with friends at shopping centers or at home because there's more stuff to do there. We have our consoles, which can have up to 4 players, but usually there'll be more people, so people will swap after a match. Haha, not even close to as long, but I was in jail before, during, and after the 2016 election, and it was weird to see people slowly finding out that Trump had become president. The police didn't tell anyone who had won, and we had to wait for all the new inmates to come in. Most people thought they were lying when they said Trump won, especially people who had been in since before Obama. I was in for 3 days back in '99. Last meal before I went in, McRib. I got out and the McRib was gone. I went for 2 months. When I went in, everyone was playing PS3. Got mine stolen, and when I got out, everyone was playing PS4, and I had neither. Can you imagine trying to understand memes? That's a long ride, man. The problem is that now they're just one inside joke inside of another inside joke inside of another inside joke. If you weren't there from the beginning, it's hopeless. I keep picturing the scene from Shawshank Redemption where Brooks is released from prison after decades of incarceration. The world has changed so much that he's overwhelmed and doesn't last long on the outside. I can't imagine how hard it must be to acclimatize if you don't have good support. That scene was so sad. If I remember the quote correctly, didn't he say he was in there for 50 years, released in 1955, and going into prison in 1905? Coming out after 2 world wars, television, radio, cars, and everything. That is an incredibly sad part of that movie. I don't know if more has changed for an inmate coming out who was incarcerated in the 90s, but the way we operate in society may have changed more, if anything, just by the influence of smartphones. Something about old guys looking at the world passing them by messes me up more than anything. I remember going down with my pops to get some ice cream a while back, and he just asked for a cone, and they asked him what kind he wanted, and he said he didn't know, so they just started listing off the whatever 40 flavors they had. And he just had this tragic, confused look on his face, and I remember leaving with him, and he said to me, "I don't even understand ice cream anymore." That crap makes me sad for some reason. Life is fleeting. Time goes by so quickly. I'm 40 now. That number messed with me for a while when I hit my birthday in January. 20 doesn't seem that far away. What messes with me now is music. There are no more decades to me. 80s, 90s, 2000s, sure. Everything after that is a mishmash of stuff. Man, I just turned 40 2 months ago. I feel you. For me, it's technology. I was always on the cutting edge. I ran a BBS from middle school all through the 90s, was into the pirate underground scene, was always building PCs and overclocking, and became a software dev and knew everything cool on the internet. Now it's all Snapchat and Instagram on phones, and the apps are so poorly designed and hard to navigate. Not to mention, so many of them harvest your metadata and user info, so it's downright scary to install any app. And new tech comes out so quickly I don't even care about it anymore. It feels bad, man.
A friend of my dad's just got released a while back. He was in for about 8 years, and the other day he was talking to my dad about how vaping is so healthy for you, and he has individual ringtones for each of his contacts. He's hilarious, but we don't mention anything about how behind he is. It's not as extreme an amount of time as others, but you can still tell he's adapting. Wait, is it weird to have individual ringtones for people? Well, I'm an old young person, apparently. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I used to work in prison. I recall a lifer going out for the day and being mind-blown by ATMs and the moving conveyor belts at the supermarkets.
Yeah, they probably don't know what Reddit is.
To be fair, I don't exactly know what Reddit is either. No one can be told what Reddit is, you have to see it for yourself. My best friend just got out in January after 12 years. He can't handle the awesomeness of Netflix, also booking stuff online. I'm still teaching him Amazon. Oh, and you pick your seat at the movie theater. I'm not really over that yet either. He loves that YouTube now has a video for everything. You want to fix your golf swing? There's a video. Want to properly cut up a papaya or tie a certain kind of fly fishing lure? There's a video. Obviously, smartphones and whatnot have been a big difference, but the big difference to me is simply that I rarely see kids outside. Anyone who remembers the 80s and 90s remembers that past 5 p.m. there were groups of youth aging 16 to 28 literally roaming everywhere. I mean, just huge groups of youth standing around at corners, drinking and smoking. The parks were filled with them doing substances and whatnot, and after 9 p.m. blocks were basically overrun with youths. Parties were everywhere. Even the losers had zero trouble finding some crazy party to go to. I've been out for a while and I traveled all over the States. The one universal change I will say is that I rarely see that kind of youth culture anywhere anymore. I'm not sure if there are just 3/4 less kids or if the kids are just all inside now. Youth culture used to be in your face constantly. People used to stand on the street corners with boom boxes and have breakdance competitions, with plenty of substances passed around. I haven't seen anything remotely similar to that. Another thing is crime. Crime used to be everywhere. Even normal, well-to-do people knew about and were often even slightly engaged in some form of crime. They often had siblings that were into crime, or they knew neighbors who were into it. If you ever wanted anything extra done that was illegal, there was always guys you could go to. There was your normal life, then there was your sort of underground life. Almost everyone had one or knew plenty of people that were into it. I remember as a youth, me and my friends used to sell Lucy cigarettes and transport stolen goods from store to store for this seedy Italian guy on our block. In my early 20s, we used to help find guys to pay off landlords to let us throw parties on their rooftops. Everyone did this sort of stuff. That was considered kind of normal youth stuff back then. Today, that would seem like something only a serious criminal would do. Even our parents had their dealings with shady characters. Those are really the two biggest changes I've noticed anyway. The looks people give you when you say, "I only have cash." Not me, but a friend's older brother was in prison for 8 years from 2003 to 2011. He was most shocked about how movies had changed and how much detail they had now. Also, was shocked about computers. I met a guy who'd been in since the 90s and he kinda dressed and styled like Vanilla Ice when he got out. I think his dad still had all his clothes. I only served a couple of months back in 2015. I was released alongside a man who was in between 20 to 25 years. I forget exactly, but it was a lot. All of the people in my program were in great spirits after only being in for a couple of months. We had our girlfriends picking us up, talking about our plans, just bullcrapping around. This guy looked scared. As I wanted to leave every single one of my possessions behind, this guy had everything with him. A TV that still has the RCA connection, a CD player, all his clothes, some food, and a couple of shoes. He knew he was in for a shock. I have an employee who served 11 years. Coming back to real life is hard for these dudes. He won't go into a convenience store if it's too crowded. He can't handle himself around proper people because he's too desocialized. Oof. Not to devalue this man's clear trauma, but I know at least a few people who feel like that generally, especially post-pandemic. If a prison can turn a regular, functional person to that level of anxiety, you've got to feel sorry for them. My brother is in now, incarcerated in November 2017, and won't get out until 2031 unless a miracle happens. I can't imagine what kind of world he'll be rejoining.
I wish there was a feature on Reddit to bring me back to this thread once there were some more answers in a few years. It sounds like a good topic.
What happened to Legos? I'm not saying it's bad, I just want to know what happened.
Legos lost their patent, leading to the Lego apocalypse, and so to be able to compete with the new companies, they started focusing on more themed kits, making it easy for them to latch on to whatever was popular at the time. I miss when you could just go buy a big box of mixed bricks.
My best friend was in jail for a considerable amount of time. He didn't know how to use the new touchscreen washing machines, iPhone, or even the dishwasher. Also, wireless headphones blew his mind. Had to teach him how to call and message people and use apps. He's addicted to social media now, haha. Family member got released after about 5 years. He said the most surprising thing is all the radio stations still play the same music, like only 1/3 of it is new to him. He wasn't in for that long, but it still shines a light on the music industry and radio. A guy I knew who went in the 90s always used to say the biggest difference is white women all of a sudden got big butts. How much shish kebabs have changed? We had some shish kebabs, then we started calling them kebabs. Now it's just babs, so it went from shish kebab to kebab to bab. I wasn't in prison, but enlisted in the military in early 2009 and did most of my training here in the States for that year. So I wasn't completely out of the loop, but after finishing boot camp and training for my job in 2009, I was stationed overseas for 2 years. Upon arrival to my new duty station, I got an iPhone 3GS, but I quickly lost it within a month, and never bothered getting another one. On base, the internet was practically 56K modem speeds, for whatever reason. I think it was due to insufficient infrastructures to provide service to so many people. So my internet usage was limited because of slow speeds and limited free time at work. I remembered Christmas and New Year of 2010, Command didn't approve leave for us to go home, so that we would be ready to deploy if necessary. Everyone ended up getting all boozed up at the barracks, and I mostly spent my time playing PS3 offline because of aforementioned crappy internet. So basically, from 2009 through 2011, during the rise of online video streaming services and smartphones, I missed out on all of that. It wasn't prison or anything, so I was aware, but didn't experience any of it firsthand. Coming back to the States the beginning of 2012 was like traveling a couple of years into the future. Netflix used to arrive by mail, but all of a sudden, the fact that I could access any show I wanted from a single website blew my mind. In the span of the 2 or 3 years, internet speeds increased exponentially for the same cost. It didn't help that I spent the whole time with archaic internet while on base. In 2009, I had a PlayStation Portable for gaming and had to lug around multiple UMDs. Now I can just go to the App Store and download from a plethora of mobile apps on my smartphone, all at 4G speeds. So while it wasn't nearly as drastic as being in prison from the early 2000s until 2018, even those couple of years in the early 2010s where I was away were pretty crazy when I returned. I can only imagine what it'd be like for anyone locked away for 5, 10, or 20 or more years. I bet they wonder why, before they entered prison, people used to say that they graduated from college, and now that they just say graduated college, that would be an unsettling shift. My uncle was incarcerated in '85. Several years ago, we went for a visit and took snacks. The plastic grocery bag blew his mind. My mum was locked up for 10 years starting in the early 2000s. The first time I paused live TV, she lost her frickin' mind. I was actually friends with a guy who was on death row for 20 years. He said it was the cell phones. Who sits for 20 years? And how does he tell you? And where is he now? How does he know about cells? It's actually not unusual at all. The problem is with the death penalty is if you make a mistake and convict an innocent, you've irrevocably screwed up. So those on death row get a lot of appeals. Capital punishment is extremely costly because of the court fees, more costly than not having the death penalty in fact. Not only that, but innocent people occasionally are executed despite the checks in place. I was in prison from 2003 until 2011. Wasn't really surprised by much of anything. Inside, we watched television every day, and the commercials prepared me for the technology. I had the New York Times delivered to my cell or cube daily. We had radios, news, BBC, NPR, etc. Smartphones really weren't that difficult to grasp. I came of age during the early internet era, so smartphones were just mini computers with touchscreens. If anything, technology was more user-friendly than it had been before I went away. You see, it's not the technology that's difficult to adapt to, it's the people. There's a prison culture, and once you adapt to it, you learn to respect and even appreciate it. You see the same people every day, and it's a tense, testosterone-driven environment. Negotiating the unspoken rules means understanding the importance of showing respect without showing fear, and the only way to do that honestly is to get in touch with yourself, to overcome your insecurities, to quiet your righteous anger, to develop a sense of when it's time to move out of the way and when it's time to stand your ground. The culture forces you to become a man among men. Coming home to a society of selfish, arrogant, disrespectful, self-assured adult children who glorify their minor struggles on social media and perpetuate this culture of self-identified victimization was, and continues to be, difficult. In prison, not only will you not be celebrated for your so-called courage in aggrandizing your victimization, you'll be mocked for not handling the problem like a man. Out here, it seems almost a contest as to who can cry the loudest and blame the most. In my personal life, the same people crying wolf and routinely shifting blame are the ones who dismiss me as a human being because of my prison experience. Ironically, my prison experience is the same reason I dismiss them, and so I feel a chasm has grown between the man I became in prison and the culture I came home to as a 32-year-old adult. And every time I sense someone of relevance in my life dismiss my opinion, subtly condescend to me, gossip about me just out of earshot, etc., I feel that chasm grow. How have your real-life love triangles played out? None of us ended up with any of us, and a whole new set of friends had to be found. Had a thing with a guy, he proceeds to kiss best friend. I forgive them both, they proceed to make out in secret, and got to the point where he asked her to go to bed with him. They cracked and told me again. This had not been the first time something like this had happened with my friend. Needless to say, he no longer had a love interest after that, and I lost a crappy friend, which I guess is a win in the end. I've never understood the whole go after a friend's significant other thing. I once had a former boyfriend's roommate hit on me after we'd broken up, and even that felt weird and off-putting. Oh, I've got one. Dated a guy, really liked him. Maybe was reaching love levels. He then cheats on and dumps me for another girl. Great. Literally the next week, his best friend, who was not at all my type, was messaging me and was reassuring me that my ex told him he would be perfect for me and encouraged him to try to date me. I cut them both out of my life so fast. I had a friend in high school who'd always try to hit on or steal my significant others, even if she didn't like them at all. She just didn't want me getting all the attention. She even did it with new friends. Had a best friend since college who was always hawking on my boyfriends. Then I decided to switch things up and date a woman. She flirted with her too. Then I realized it wasn't just about competing. There was some strange thing she had for me, or against me. I could never figure it out. Anyway, we're not friends anymore, but we are cordial when we see each other. The female competition thing really bums me out. 3 of my friends and I all liked the same girl. They would hit on her. I instead befriended her older and very protective brother. I got the girl. Did he befriend the brother solely to win the girl? No, he's actually a super interesting guy in his own right. A very successful entrepreneur who has worked in the most dangerous countries on Earth, doing absolutely insane crap, i.e. selling helicopters in Brazil or protecting coal ships from pirates. What the frick is that dude's job title? Ron Swanson. Color me pleasantly surprised that he genuinely befriended the guy to be a pal, and not just to use him in a sort of male-dominated medieval family dynamic to get approval to court his sister. I worked offshore. I knew I was going to be gone for a few months. Girlfriend said she wanted to wait since I was such a great guy. I came back and she was the same number of months pregnant that I had been gone. We'd always used protection, so I was skeptical but supportive. She had the kid and it was a different race than either of us. She admitted that while I'd been gone, she had had another boyfriend, then added that she was still seeing him. Acted like it was completely normal, as if it would have been crazy for her to stay alone like she'd offered to. DNA test? Not mine. Nope, the F out. Other guy goes to prison a few months later. Rumor mill says he was a mean-tempered and bullying spouse. She stalked me for decades, called my parents to find me, called my grandparents to find me. I'd see her around town and she would start following me and begging me to give her another chance. I eventually moved 700 miles away. She still calls, unlisted numbers to this day because of her. She gets the number from family or friends. Last I heard, she has 3 kids with 3 dads, never had a job, 2 of the dads in prison. I'm her one that got away. In some ways, I do feel sad for her. She's had a rough life. According to her, I was the only guy who treated her well. If she'd reciprocated, who knows? Our romance was in 1996. I got a message from her on Facebook last month. I didn't reply. Man, if she'd applied half of that drive and persistence into developing stable relationships with a good guy that returned her interest, she'd have a great life right now. Well, I mean, technically she's trying to do that.
My dude dodged a tsunami with that girl.
Was dating a guy, he confessed to one of his best friends that he liked her. She rejected him. Was mad because I was second choice, but forgave because frick my life. He still likes her and she messes with him. They fight because she doesn't want me around. They become friends again, I dump him. He admits to never loving me and was in it for the act of a relationship. Now he's all over her and she still plays him. I'm here sad because I loved him. Rest in peace, me.
I hope you feel better. I know exactly how it feels to be used. I always wonder what people are thinking when they pull this crap. It will get better, I promise you. Keep on keeping on, friend.
Was being manipulated by a guy 7 years older than me. He was gaslighting me and stringing me along. His girlfriend and baby mama knew about me, but stayed with him and blamed me for everything. I eventually cut him off and they got married. She messaged me on Facebook about a year ago, asking if we'd slept together while they were married. I hadn't, and she apologized for putting everything on me. It was unfair for her to do because I was so young, 19 when it started, and he was manipulating me and taking advantage of how naive I was. She explained that she had kicked him out and was beginning divorce proceedings because I wasn't the only one he cheated on her with. And he continued to cheat on her after they were married, including with her next-door neighbor. We ended up talking and laughing over what a scumbag loser he is, and laughing over the fact that we fell for his crap. I recently messaged her to ask how the divorce turned out. It's over, she came out on top, and me and her are friendly now. I was in college and I really liked this college guy in one of my classes. We instantly hit it off and became great friends. I really liked him. I was head over heels and he knew it. He was still hung up on his ex-girlfriend, but we fooled around from time to time. A guy from my high school kept asking me out and I kept turning him down. He wasn't my type, but we remained friends. All of my friends were telling me to give high school guy a chance, but I wanted college guy. I got super sick and texted college guy asking if he could take me to the hospital. He never replied, but I know he read it. So I texted high school guy and he was at my apartment in 10 minutes and even offered to pay my copay because I was flat broke at the time. I did pay him back. After that happened, college guy wouldn't talk to me for a while and like an idiot I kept going after him. I was super heartbroken. High school guy helped me through it. Finally, I decided to give him a shot. Now we're married and about to celebrate our 7-year anniversary with our 3-year-old son.
When you say he wasn't your type, what specifically do you mean by that? Seems like he was your type after all.
Not the original writer, but I do have a similar story of giving the other guy a chance and it working out. Me and the significant other are going on 5 years. My significant other was not my type. At the time. I figured it out once I started dating him and that what I thought was my type wasn't really my type. Don't knock it until you try it sort of thing. Hey, at least the high school guy's patience paid off. What a truly nice gentleman. All 3 of us now hate each other with the fury of 1,000 suns and wouldn't particularly care if the other 2 died of Lou Gehrig's disease. So not too bad, all things considered. I included the simple summary of a love triangle just because it seems like a concise summary of how the majority of these things have to play out. This is a story of a love square versus a love triangle, but it's pretty crazy. I had been living together with my girlfriend for maybe 6 months, together for maybe a year. She cheated pretty bad, but I don't know the depths of it. But at least 2 guys. She would tell me how much she loves me every 30 seconds, which made me believe that she was loyal. She didn't discuss other men, not as friends or anything, all silence. I'm not the jealous type at all, so I normally just trust and assume it's all good until it isn't. Nobody got caught, she just secretly planned to move in with one of the guys and surprise moved out one day. Not such a great feeling coming into an empty home. Took years to even learn of what transpired. She'd had a tough childhood and always told people the gruesome story of her mum dying at the hands of her father, with specifically her mum's eye dangling from the socket. Fast forward 1.5 years and I'm living with a new girlfriend and I share the eye dangling story and a light bulb goes off in her head. We piece together what happened. When I was living with cheating girlfriend, we had some drama. She'd broken up with me, got with a guy, then came back to me, in addition to other trust-eroding issues, so I was basically not interested in doing the deed with her due to a lack of trust. Cheating girlfriend apparently was sleeping with the boyfriend of what would be my girlfriend in 1.5 years. Boyfriend of future girlfriend says, "Oh hey, I know this girl, she's had a tough life," and tells the whole mum dying story with specifically the dangling eye, which is how we figured it out, and goes on, "She needs a place to stay, can she stay with us?" She's worried her roommate is going to commit the unspeakable act against her. My future girlfriend calls him out that he's cheating with her, since he has a history of cheating and he admits it, so obviously she did not stay with them. Honestly, the cheating I don't mind as much as calling me a roommate and the potential unspeakable act committer when I thought I was in love with this girl, claiming to be my girlfriend and wanting to settle down with me. In conclusion, my girlfriend at the time had an ex-boyfriend that cheated on her with the girl I was seeing who cheated on me. Also, before I'd met my girlfriend at the time, apparently I'd had a dalliance with her childhood best friend. Had no idea. I didn't actually do anything wrong since that predated our relationship, but I still feel like a jerk about it between those two sordid bits of history. My bedroom life included maybe 5 people in a period of 2 years, and 3 of them are all intertwined like this. It's crazy. Kinda related, but my Aunt Janet was cheated on by my Uncle John with a girl Kate. Kate was cheating with John on her husband Brandon. Now Kate and John are getting married, and Janet and Brandon are getting married. Basically, they switched partners. All fake names, of course. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was on a work contract on location. I met a guy, started dating, and things were good. One day, he told me his ex was going to be in town for a day and that they were going to hang out. That night, we were supposed to meet for drinks at the pub, and he was super distant and acting strange. It was obvious to me that he'd hooked up with her. He ended up leaving early to go to bed, alone. I was teed off. There was another guy also working for the company who'd always flirted with me. I happened to literally run into him as I'm headed outside to the balcony. Maybe it was something I was giving off, but he grabbed me and kissed me, and I went with it, and we ended up hooking up that night on the balcony, which also happened to be the place me and the first guy hooked up the first time. The next day, Guy 1 confesses that he hooked up with his ex. I told him I could tell and kind of left it at that. We just started hanging out less, and I started seeing a lot more of Guy 2. One day, it was quite apparent that they both weren't talking to me. They had talked. I rode up the elevator with one of their co-workers one day who told me that they were both upset that I'd hooked up with both of them in the same location, which frankly, I still think is silly. They ended up making friends, but I was out of the picture. Last week of my contract rolls around, and one particular party night, Guy 1 is giving me a lot of attention. Guy 2 also sees this going on. I end up leaving with Guy 1. At my place, the phone rings, and it's Guy 2, and he asks to speak to Guy 1. They're both from the same country, so they end up having some long drawn-out conversation that I don't understand. 10 minutes later, there's a knock on the door. It's Guy 2. He asks to come in. I let him, and they both proceed to start kissing me and removing my clothes. That was a good night. Not so much a love triangle as a love V, but here's how it went. I liked this girl had a boyfriend, but was bi-curious and into me. She asked her boyfriend if experimenting with me was okay. He said it was okay so long as he was involved too. Me being 21 and having a bad case of the feelings, I agreed to this. It lasted maybe a month and it was really awkward. It ended up with me breaking up with them, but those two staying together. After that, I decided I'm not into guys at all and I would rather not repeat that experience. I don't talk to that pair much anymore, but I think they're married now. Yeah, I think most of the love triangles in my life that I've run into could be described as love Vs, i.e. one sad loser on the side has a crush on one of the parties. Luckily, there are a couple of true love triangles to help us fulfill the question in this video's heading. A few years back, I had hernia surgery and was on bed rest for a few days. One night, out of nowhere, an old fling hit me up telling me she was in the neighborhood. I was ecstatic at hearing her voice because she was one of the most beautiful, intelligent, and successful people I knew, and I always admired her. She ended up coming over and taking care of me, and we hit it off way better than before. I didn't know it at the time, but she was dating this guy since forever and was even living with him. When I found out, I told her I was going to be seeing other people too. We still ended up seeing each other for a few months, and eventually she had to tell him that she had cheated on him with me. He wanted her to stay even after we spent a weekend at my cabin. She stayed with the other guy because he was a safe option and she needed a place to stay. I couldn't promise her anything because I felt like I couldn't trust her and she didn't like the fact that I was dating other people. In reality, we were in a relationship and I saw other people as a way to not think about her living with her boyfriend. The whole thing was a crappy situation because we were madly in love with each other, but because of our trust issues, we ended up breaking it off. I ended up in a relationship with someone else for like a month. We never really talked since then. She married that guy a few months after I married my wife. She still calls at night from time to time, but I never answer because I'm happily married and I don't need that kind of trouble in my life. Don't want to be intrusive, but no other way to ask. Does your wife know? How does she feel about this? No, I never really considered it worth mentioning. Prefer to let sleeping dogs lie. Ha, wise move. Was a few years ago, and I'm currently still with one of them. My ex-boyfriend was manipulative and an emotional bully, not to mention pushed me into physical things that I didn't want to do. His influence caused me to begin working at Olive Garden while during my sophomore year at college, which led to the entrance of my current significant other. My ex was cheating with multiple girls via text over a period of months. Each time I confronted him resulted in a tearful plea of, "I'll change, I love you so much, I can't bear hurting you," after it occurred. After half a year of this, I'd virtually numbed myself to his pleas, but was too afraid of what I'd lost, my virginity, to give up the relationship. Instead, I acted as his transportation since his parents were unreliable and he was trying to finish his high school diploma. He was 1.5 years younger than me, so at Olive Garden, I never expected to find anyone else because of the restaurant environment and was not actually looking for anyone else. My ex also joined working there after quitting a nearby restaurant. He was absolutely crap at his job as a host, often infuriating the managers with his stupidity and lack of common sense. Eventually, I noticed another guy who I called a better and more mature version of the ex, but I was not planning on leaving at that time. My current significant other was sarcastic, aloof from everyone else, and mysterious, which of course attracted me, but I still had some attachment to the ex because I was fiercely loyal to a fault. I regret how I handled the falling out and transition to my current significant other because I did not cut off the ex like most people would have, and how I know I should have. Slowly, I developed an admiration for my SO and felt butterflies in my stomach whenever he was near. It was not a linear upward progression in our initial stages of relationship because even though he hated my ex, he respected the boundaries of a relationship. This changed, however, when he began to realize I was interested in him, and he felt as though he might rescue me from this jerk. I too looked at him as a rescuer. The ex began to notice his attention in me and that his presence was often near me, causing him to purposefully be a butt by leaving dirty dishes on my significant other's table, making inflammatory comments to him, and entering the area whenever he saw SO and I near each other. This became a sort of tango around the restaurant. I knew the ex became agitated by seeing me near my SO, so I would increasingly be around him and then disappear when the ex came into the area. I would still drive him places, but when he prompted me to confirm he and I were in a relationship, I would deflect and never answer straightly. One lonely night, I was texting my SO and he invited me to his apartment to watch a Quentin Tarantino movie. I gladly went and watched the movie with him, but nothing else happened because he was not the type to push, and I had been extremely damaged by the ex's advances to the point where I would later tremble just laying in the same bed as my SO, as a result of my ex. Our texting grew more frequent while I became more dismissive and numb toward the ex. I feared for my SO's safety because my ex is genuinely psychopathic and seemed to blame him for taking me away from him. One night driving my ex home, I knew I had to end it. He was sobbing and wanted me to hold him, but I couldn't stand touching him as I knew it was over. I had to carefully word my sentences so that he would finally leave my damn car. Then one night I found out the ex was stalking my SO. He had followed him to the apartment, which scared me to death knowing he was immature and prone to reactivity. Shortly after, as I left the SO's apartment to go home and had stopped off at a Wendy's drive-thru, my ex pulled up in his truck next to me and rolled down the window, grinning. He then pulled out a military-style knife and informed me it was just in case something happened. This was too close to comfort for me, so I texted his father to let him know what his son had done, causing the ex to be infuriated with me. However, I knew his father would not let that situation happen again. Since then, I've received lovelorn letters about how much I was still thought of, and that even when we are old and grey, he'll still love me. He attempted quite recently to make a friendship pact with my SO to have limited access to me, which he rationally declined. It's been a month since the ex last sent a message over social media that he was moving on and wished me the best. However, I intrinsically know this claim to be false and expect the day when he makes contact again. I don't think I'll ever be rid of him, honestly, unless he falls deeply in love with someone else to where the obsession falls on her. My conclusion of being in a love triangle for a short time was that I was confused, hurt, lonely, and looking for someone to rescue me. But I regret that it happened in a way where I could label it as a love triangle because it was unfair to both parties. I won't deny it's exciting to have two people dance with each other for your affections, but it isn't by any means healthy and at least one of the people will be hurt. After me basically being a butthole for a bit and stringing them both along while I tried to make up my mind, I stopped dating both of them and stayed single for about a year to get my crap together. I think generally if you're caught in a love triangle and don't know who to choose, that's a sign that neither of them is right for you. That is strangely down to earth for a person who was evidently involved in a situation that sounds like it was pretty unhealthy for a while. Good on you for changing, and I hope you keep it up. Married a gay guy. We were non-monogamous. I got really close to a friend with benefits, and now we're a 3. Took a hot mess and nearly 2 years of drama, but we are a functioning poly-triad. We definitely had our moments, but we're still here now, so we do live together and usually share a bed. They can both be complete punks about space and covers, and only one of us actually likes sleeping in the middle, so I occasionally take a break for a night or two. We're not actually non-monogamous, read open. Obviously, I do the deed with more than one person, 2 in fact, but that's just mostly been a crap ton of life stuff going on, including a big move, so that side of our lives has just been sort of on hold. Mine was like some kind of freak love square. Two guys wanted to date me, and I wanted to date a guy who didn't give a crap about me unless it involved dancing. I gave up on chasing the dancer. I dated one of the guys who originally wanted to date me. It ended badly. I decided to date the other guy who seemed interested. We got married and are expecting a baby now. We were pretty good friends. She wasn't sure if she was into girls and wanted to experiment with someone she trusted. He and I had been dating on and off for 3 years, together for a full year at the time. We'd had a couple of three-ways, and after a couple of drunken kisses between me and her, we suggested she join us. We worked well together for 6 months, dating each other equally. I was 3 years older than her, and people said we looked alike. Then she got a haircut and a dye job, and she suddenly looked like my little sister. It was not something I was into at all. But he was, and she was. And I pulled back a little, and then it was me versus her, and he chose her. And then dumped her because he wanted her little sister. Her actual flesh and blood little sister. In conclusion, he chose her, she was the younger one, he left her because he was into her little sister. It made me less bitter. He asked her to marry him at my birthday dinner. She said yes, I got drunk, he drove me home. Our D&D group survived the event, and I was a bridesmaid.
That's a crap move on his part.
I'd been with my ex for 2 years, treated her like the princess that she wanted to be, gave her unconditional trust, which I have now learned was a mistake. She had terrible social skills, so I encouraged her to make guy friends as she doesn't have any. Tried to get her back in contact with one of her long-lost friends from teenage years and encouraged them to spend time together, and I even spent time and got to know the guy to show my girl I have her interests in mind. She ends up doing the deed with him and telling me that they share a pure form of love, something she never had for me. Cried, been depressed, and felt like a worthless piece of crap because no matter what I did, it seems like I don't deserve to be loved. Forgave her, tried to win her back, and gave her patience and time while hiding how much this is killing me inside because she feels guilty to see me like this. End up figuring out she was just a spoiled, selfish brat because she will not stop lying to me and kept seeing him, and he is a manipulative and controlling substance addict, and they both never had a real relationship and told me that they developed true love within a couple of weeks of doing the deed with each other. It still hurts me like heck to think about this, but I really did everything that I could. It didn't end up good for me, fricked me up mentally as I have depression, 0 out of 10 would not recommend. Older generations. Who are the "I don't use computers" people of your time? My grandparents are very old-fashioned even for their generation, if it counts. My grandfather worked as a grocery manager for years. He finally quit when his small mum-and-pup store buckled down on bar scans and electronic cash registers. He was convinced that barcodes were going to be the mark of the beast from Revelations, and that if people use computers to access adult content, then all computerized items must be banned. So there's that. When remote control TVs came out, I suggested that my father buy one, and he said, "It will be a cold day in hell when I'm too lazy to tell one of you boys to get up and change the channel for me." It was such an amazing sentence that I committed it to memory, and I still remember it word for word 50 years later. From his point of view, he already had a remote control TV. Why should he pay extra to have it automated? Exactly. He would have had us act out Game of Thrones before getting a subscription to HBO. My mom was just telling me about when answering machines were new and how people were so fearful of them and refused to leave a message. She got promoted at a job because she didn't mind calling clients and leaving messages. I bought my grandmother an answering machine in 2005. She refused to get one before that, despite several of her children begging her to invest in one. I got her a $10 one from Walmart. I told her that I'd set it up for her, and she asked me where it was. She was under the impression that answering machines were about the size of a toaster oven. After some questions, I also learned that she objected to getting one for so long because she was concerned about how much counter space she thought it would take up. But she also used the same bathwater for a week at the time and kept her hearing aid batteries, all of them, not just the ones she wasn't currently using, in the freezer so they would last longer. So who knows? Some of the older alkaline batteries would slowly discharge over time. You could slow them down by storing the ones you weren't using in the freezer. It didn't make them last a lot longer, but it did give a slightly longer shelf life. However, my grandmother would keep all of her batteries in the freezer and not have any batteries in her hearing aids at all. As you can guess, that didn't improve her hearing, no matter how long the batteries were lasting in the freezer. I mean, I might be wrong. That sounds like it might stray from being technologically illiterate and just not caring that much about functioning in life in general. The battery freezer thing might be an incredible case of being a cheapskate. Some still had outdoor toilets and were laughing at those who'd installed them inside because
they're crapping in their own houses?
I lived on a homestead a little while. I had an outdoor pit privy toilet. I hand-carved the toilet seat myself. Sometimes I miss watching the sunset while taking a dump. It was way better than being stuck in a small room reading Reddit on my phone. Unless it was raining. Wiping while holding an umbrella is trickier than it looks. When I was a kid, late 50s and early 60s, seatbelts in the cars were an option. Lots of people thought they were unnecessary and refused to pay extra for them. Heaters and windshield defoggers were likewise optional. My parents bought a new 1964 Plymouth Valiant and didn't get the option.
I think all it takes is one snowfall in the winter when you're struggling with a windshield that constantly fogs up and frosts over. Absolute misery pulling over and scraping the inside of your windshield. My dad once told me a story about his grandmother refusing to fly in planes because she didn't want to get her hair all messed up from the wind. I'm picturing her flying with Red Baron Snoopy as the pilot. Honey, I promise your hair won't get messed up from the wind. Plops leather bomber hat on her head. My 89-year-old mum pays for cable but insists on watching only PBS and occasionally NBC, CBS or ABC. The other channels are too much technology to find on the remote. She also buys multiple boxes or cans of food, dates them in Sharpie marker, records the price, less coupon or sale special, and has a rack for all her finds. She will never eat all the oatmeal or beans in our collective lifetimes. But she was a Depression-era child, so I get why the urge to stock up on food is strong. My grandmother is 89. When she was a kid, she had an uncle who hated cars. He called them machines and refused to drive one. It could have been job security though, her whole family worked for the railroad. In all fairness, cars are machines. Then again, so are trains. Fun fact, the Russian word for car is machina. My dad is 65. He remembers old folks complaining about the forward pass in football. But it did completely change the game.
My grandaunt still believes that 15 is the age of adulthood, that schooling isn't necessary beyond that point. She grew up in a time when literacy wasn't a given. With a bachelor's degree and a very mediocre Spanish, I would have killed it in 1920. For all of about 8 years.
Well, now I'm greatly depressed. My grandmother drinks only hot decaf coffee. Breakfast, hot decaf coffee. Dinner, hot decaf coffee. Feeling parched after a day of hard work? Hot decaf coffee. 100-degree July day with lung-clogging humidity? Hot decaf coffee. When I was growing up, we never had ice. That was a luxury. Cold drinks aren't good for your stomach.
My parents are from former Soviet country and also refuse to drink anything cold, saying it'll make you sick. My dad doesn't even drink beer cold. Room temperature at most. Any beer-drinking alcoholic will tell you you can drink a lot more beers if your beers are room temperature instead of cold. This is actually a very common thing in Asia. In China, they only drink hot water. According to Chinese medicine, cold water, and cold things in general, are very bad for your stomach. They won't eat refrigerated fruit. I lived in China for a few years, and my roommate thought I was insane for refrigerating my watermelon. I found that was the safest way to store it because none of them would touch it. In Germany, they don't put ice in their water. I've never liked ice in my water, so living in both Germany and China at different points in my life worked for me. The US is actually pretty unique in that everyone wants their beverages ice cold.
I had a Chinese roommate in college who kept a gallon of Sunny D out at room temperature for weeks while drinking it. Weirded me out.
My grandparents laughed at the idea of a mobile phone, or sending messages through the phone line when fax machines were a thing. My grandparents didn't like computers and they still had a typewriter or wrote by hand. I was given a typewriter as a kid, but then I was using Windows 95.
OG hipster right there.
I'll be honest, as a 30-something-year-old, I have no idea what a fax actually is. The gosh darn answer would be one Google search away, but I'm going to live on in ignorance for a few more minutes, so you lot can judge whether this is normal or whether I'm exceptionally ignorant. Back in the 80s, I knew an old lady who used one of those really old toasters that could only toast one side of the bread at a time. As a present, we went out and bought her a modern pop-up toaster, but she wouldn't use it. She preferred to use her old one.
I could see if she had one of those rad Sunbeam Radiant toasters, which in many ways are superior to any toaster on the market today, but this is just a fire waiting to happen.
I see you've also watched that Technology Connections video. I'm the web designer for a local organization. Their treasurer refuses to accept card payment via their website. People have to print out forms, fill them out, and post them with a check. I also get paid by check with a handwritten note. They would be a much more popular and successful business if they just modernized a little.
My law firm still uses checks. We're also on QuickBooks Desktop 2008, and our timekeeping software is from 2011. We don't use Word, we use WordPerfect, and our forms are still set up to double space after periods. Nightmarish. My grandmother didn't like to use the remote control for her television because she was afraid it would break somehow and function as a laser dangerous enough to set things on fire. My grandmother complained about remote controls for TVs because it would promote people being lazy. Because apparently watching TV in the first place is a rigorous activity. Modern day. I've had people tell me using a voice-activated light system in my house is lazy because there's something to be said for getting up and turning on a light. Like what? It builds character to flip a switch? I'll take my space house, thanks. My Depression-era parents refused to ever have AC because it seemed frivolous and unnecessary, and my dad chose seatbelts as the symbol of government overreach and refused to ever wear one. In 1980, we took a family trip from Virginia to St. Louis and back with 4 kids in the bed of a pickup truck. I remember my grandma telling stories of when AC was a new feature in cars. People would keep their windows rolled up in summer so that people in other cars would think they had AC. My parents didn't have AC. I begged for it constantly, and every time my mum would send me outside for a few minutes instead. That way, it would seem cooler inside by comparison. If it didn't, she'd tell me that I could go up into the attic and come back down. They bought an AC unit the year after I graduated and moved out. They just didn't want me to be comfortable, I guess. Being miserable builds character, or something. My senior year of high school, I had a series of newspaper articles in the local paper explaining how the web wasn't a fad and wasn't going away. Nobody but one guy at the paper believed it. It was 1995. My high school, I graduated in 2000, was like this. We didn't have computers in high school, and although there was pressure to buy them, the administration claimed computers were a dying fad, and spent the money that was to go for a computer lab on new football equipment instead. This was rural Pennsylvania, and I assure you, I'm not making this up. Others did bring up a good point and stated this is a tactic for administration to spend how they want versus what the school needs. Also, according to people who still live there whose kids now go to school there, the school did a 180 on technology in the early 2000s, and kids now have computer classes. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I had a professor in college that taught building systems. He was like 80 years old, knew all of the new ways to build a structure, never used CAD. All of his details and plans were hand-drawn. I've taught a couple of classes on how to use more advanced functions in CAD. None of my students had ever even seen a French curve before. I was purposely taught how to hand-draft in high school, 2007, before I learned CAD. My grandfather used to yell about, "You lazy kids and your zippers!" My father worked at a car dealership up until 2018, was a manager and had a computer on his desk. Someone filed a claim that he had harassed them, saying he sent lewd emails. IT came to his desk and logged onto his computer. Not only had he never sent an email, he had never read one either. He had more than 60,000 unread emails. His boss asked him how he knew about meetings if he never checked his email. It's not hard. You see everyone get up and walk into a location. You follow. Needless to say, he was cleared and the person making false claims was fired. Color TV. When they became common in the mid-60s, a lot of older people believed they emitted harmful rays. When Mum finally got one in circa 1972, it was kept in her bedroom and we were ushered in to watch it only on special occasions, and we had to sit at least 10 feet away. Given how small and low resolution even a big TV was in 1972, I can't help but laugh at the crowded family squinting to work out what was happening from across the room. My grandmother is 97 and told me about people who would refuse to get air conditioning or drink sodas because they're the devil's work. She grew up on a farm in a 2-room house with 11 family members living in that house. She always had sodas and the AC rocking and rolling all summer. My grandma is 79 and refuses to turn on her AC for religious and "it's gonna make mold grow everywhere" reasons. I swear she's gonna die of heat stroke one summer, but welp, she's into some kind of hardcore sub-Christian or Catholic cult. It's not Amish, Mormon, or the Jehovah's Witnesses, too minor so I forgot the name. Tech is not forbidden per se in their thing, but it's not liked at all by their thing. It's like everything bad that's happening to Canada comes from soulless new tech and immigrants. The whole thing is weird and doesn't make sense to atheist software engineering students like me, so I'd have trouble explaining more.
My mother refuses to get a smartphone. She does, however, have a tablet with a data plan she takes with her everywhere, in addition to her dumb phone. When I point out that tablets are just big smartphones, she scoffs. What can you do?
I don't read novels.
My grandfather thought they were a plot by the elites to both ruin our eyesight and keep us locked away in a fantasy world.
How old are you that the technological advancement your grandfather didn't trust was books?
Socrates has joined the chat.
Scrolls were good enough for my parents and their parents before them. Socrates didn't even really like scrolls either. Since your writings don't update as you learn more or change your mind, he thought that they would just spread misinformation and it was better to rely on talking. Love you, Socrates, but writing is the invention that allows for a large society to function.
What Socrates needed was GitHub, to be honest. I said at one time I would never buy CDs. I liked albums and tapes too much. I never got rid of the albums and tapes, but now I have many CDs also.
When they first became available, I honestly felt that both CDs and DVDs were just an industry conspiracy to stop people from recording their own music or movies with cassettes or VHS.
DVDs were originally marketed as uncrackable or uncopyable, so you're not entirely wrong. I remember it being a huge deal when that guy found out how to do it and shared that info to the world. My grandpa used to tell me that he was basically set for life because he learned to read and write. Mass illiteracy wasn't as long ago as we like to think. Touch tone dialing. My mum refused to pay the $1 and change a month to have it. She finally caved in around 2002. Since several have asked, touch tone was a keypad, much like what almost every phone is now. Before that, it was a rotary dial phone. When my dad was in his 80s and losing some of his marbles, I started taking over some of his household chores and errands. Discovered that he was still using a rotary phone because he wasn't paying for touchtone. He was, however, still paying a rental fee for his telephone. He had been renting it for 50 years. We went to the phone store and got him a touchtone and they waived the fee, so that his bill pretty much remained the same with the new phone. I also got him a cordless, but he hated using it. He'd forget how to answer it. Press talk. Poke? It was sad to watch a formerly bright person, former high school teacher, totally unable to cope with simple household items. I still miss him. Digital clocks are lazy. My school has to hold an assembly for the 5th graders every year who can't read analog clocks because they can't afford to replace all the clocks in the middle and high school buildings. As silly as this is, I think that analog clocks will always be around. As a nearsighted person, I can often read an analog when my eyes can't see a digital one. Grandfather thought graduating high school was a big deal. He graduated in 1941 and was the first in his family. We had a great aunt who hated using the washing machine and claimed it never cleaned the sheets properly. At least in Costa Rica, where I live, at that time it was all you needed. Once you ended high school, you were pretty much set up for life. Some of my grunkles married shortly after finishing it and are still happily married. Boy, that's a different time. To think it was normal for people about my age to have been married and stable for half their lives, when a lot of my counterparts right now don't own houses, is just kind of wild. My grandparents were the first people to have a television in their neck of the woods, rural North Carolina in the 1950s. A big deal back then. Grandma told a story when riding on a bus back from work one day and a couple of her neighbors were on there too. They were talking about how the Blake Burners got one of them fancy TVs, saying how it was an evil thing and would simply be bad of one of them to buy one, and that they, the neighbors, were wise enough to never get one. Of course, they knew my grandmother was on the bus with them, as they said it really loud so she would hear them. Petty jealousy from them made my grandma run off the bus in tears. Story goes that Grandpa, a mechanic who was doing well enough that they could buy a TV, was so livid that he refused to work on those neighbors' vehicles for decades. He was the only mechanic around for almost 20 miles, which back then was an hour drive from anywhere else. An acquaintance of mine told me her grandmother doesn't own a refrigerator because refrigerators are harmful and for lazy people that don't want to cook fresh food. I remember people's parents not having microwaves, although by the time I was growing up that was pretty rare. The convenience had won over almost everyone by then. I've had a coworker about 52 years old, refused to use a computer because he caught his wife having an affair on a chat room on their computer, so he destroyed it.
At that point, if she wants to cheat, she'll find another way.
Yeah, she was cheating. The computer is how he found out, right? I still have a wall phone in my kitchen. A young woman at my workplace asked me in all innocence if I sell my house, will the new owners be forced to have a landline too? My grandfather refused to get a VCR, but not because he was a Luddite. VCRs were all made in Japan, and he'd fought in the Pacific in World War II, so he refused to buy anything Japanese.
Interesting side fact, this is why Nissan originally started selling cars as Datsun. They figured there was going to be a lot of bitter vets who remembered Nissan making war materials. Did Volkswagen ever have the same problem?
They did for a bit. The brand got passed around a bunch before they started production. It was even going to be given to Ford for free, and they declined. It was offered to a bunch of different English companies. They all declined. So it was given back to Germany under supervision. It might have helped that they didn't actually make that many before all the factories started churning out war stuff. Seriously, the very first assembly plant opened in 38 and the war started in 39. Not a ton of time spent making bugs. They only made 210 before shutting down. Civilian bugs only started happening in the late 40s and only boomed in popularity in the mid-60s-ish. 20 years after the war ended, and during an entirely different war, so I imagine for some, it was easy to ignore the German aspect. Rural areas are always fun for this. In a grocery store, I overheard an older couple, back in 1989, discussing their high cholesterol levels. They didn't trust doctors and said downing a cup of really hot coffee every morning would clear the obstructions. No need for fancy medicine.
I'm 65. Back in the early 1980s, I remember my grandmother asking my dad if they still made cars with the levers, throttle and spark advance, up by the steering wheel. The last car she had driven was a Model T Ford in about 1930. My grandma refused to get a TV in the early 1950s. My dad always wanted to watch shows, but he had to sneak to his friend's house because she didn't believe in getting a TV.
My grandfather was a Mennonite, but had moved to a city and was working in factories as an adult. He even used to watch TV until John Wayne died, then he got rid of their set. He said it was evil to watch dead people moving around on a screen as if alive, like watching ghosts. He would tell us that TV was the devil's work. As a kid, I started drawing cartoon characters like animal characters and stuff. One day, he asked to see my drawings and he was outraged, saying I was drawing the product of bestiality, said it was evil. All that said, I loved him, and as I got older, he and I got really close. He was a God-fearing man, but he was also a very humble, peaceful, and funny guy. He taught me woodworking, gardening, and the joy of just sitting quietly in nature. He was just trying to save you from becoming a furry. My grandpa had to fight a hard campaign to get his dad and grandpa to switch from farming with horses to farming with tractors. His grandpa continued to maintain the horses for his own garden until his death in the 1960s. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.